We're live. Yeah, there's 2 live buttons to hit. I hit the first one to go live and sat here and waited and waited. Man, this thing's slow today, man. I realized you have to hit it twice. You have to go live twice. I guess it's like the fail safe to keep you from going live if you don't want to. 2 buttons. Too bad ending the stream only takes 1, huh? I've done that by accident. All right, so I'm getting my YouTube notifications. A little bit of a lag. Yeah, let me get these links out. Hope everybody's having a good week. It's not day. All right, let's see. Bam. Another notification. It takes a little bit, surprisingly, a little bit longer than I would think. At least they're working, but it's usually the YouTube ones that work best. Sometimes I get the Facebook ones, sometimes I don't. Let's see if any of these notifications for Facebook. Bear with me. No, none from Facebook yet, but one from, well, that might have been it too. Moonshine Militia, Fieldbilly Moonshine from YouTube, but not from any other way. Twitch. Just got my notifications from Twitch. Not Facebook. Interesting. All right, let's see here. All right, let's get these links out. What's going on, Brian? What's going on, Hellbilly? What's up, Tricky Bricky? Hey, Adam, how's it going? Yeah, I got some good advice, brother. Start asking questions. If you haven't bought a still yet, that'd probably be a good question. Next question to ask is what you might want to be distilling. Yeah, doing good, Tricky. Thanks, brother. All right, let me get these links out, and we'll be right back. Bear with me. I can't see. If y'all posted anything, I can't see it. I hate that shit. I guess I hit the button before it got posted. That's going to take up the whole link I can share too. Watch and see if I can't share them. Getting in too big a hurry. But just a minute. The person, the beginner that was asking, bear with me. I got to share links to all this, and I can't see the actual chat right now. So just bear with me, and Think about what you want to distill. You want to make whiskey, rum, vodka. You like mixed drinks best. You like bourbon. What has the next steps you're going to take has a lot to do with all those options. Let me share these links. We'll talk about it. Because that's what we're here for. Got quite a few beginners in here and quite a few intermediates. So you're in a good group to learn. So bear with me. I got a couple more links and hopefully I can get them both in. Man. We'll get all those in. Let's maybe get another one in. All right, let's see. There you go. All right. What's going on here? What's going on, Mud Grip? Hey, Wayne, what's up? Yeah, that's what we're about to talk with Adam about. Maybe from down there in Gator Country. Wait a minute, you got a cheap steel. Grew up having franchise, so we'd want to try to make harder stuff. Not interested in making beer. Good. Yeast nutrient. I mean, it's basically what the essentials that your yeast need to survive and thrive. It's mostly a lot of it has to do with nitrogen, but there's other essential nutrients, minerals, and supplements and things that it needs. Most people just use diammonium phosphate. It depends on what your distillate is, though, or what your mash is going to be. If it's going to be like a 3 grain and you're going to be using a malt, you might not need nutrients if you're going to be using malt. There's plenty of nutrients in the malt itself. So it really would depend on what your fermentation is. That usually the heavier the sugar ones, like tequila and just sugar mashes or rums with a lot of brown sugars. A lot of your brandies that have a lot of sugar in them, or just fruit that doesn't contain enough nutrients, the right nutrients. So part of the fermentation process requires, the nitrogen and ammonium, so NH4 is essential. It's kind of like growing plants, similar to plants that have to be fed. It's pretty much the same thing. They're going to require nitrogen to grow, and same thing with the plants. They require certain minerals and supplements and And so, having those helps make them a lot better, a lot happier, and a better fermentation. Is 100%. I think a lot of things you can do without them, but it stresses the yeast. They don't thrive as much, and you tend to get off flavors. So keeping your yeast happy will help keep a lot of your off flavors down, because that's stressed yeast is generally what causes a lot of off flavors and bad flavors, and the happier you can keep them, the better the flavors are going to be. So so what kind of cheap steel did you get, brother? Curious, when people say mash takes a long time, different things, cool temperatures, uh, pH, drops, uh, lack of fermentables, glucose still working on a lot of the fermentables, but usually it's temperature. A lot of times it's where the temps start changing. I see a lot of it in the fall. Everybody starts, because they get used to it happening at a certain rate during summertime, when it's 70, 80 degrees outside, right? And all of a sudden you start getting nights in the 50s and days in the 70s, and all of a sudden your fermentation is slow way down. So what's going on, Brian? So what kind of cheap steel did you get? Bourbon's what you want to make? That's awesome. Sorry, mash got stuck at 122. Tried giving a good stir. Checked pH 410 is fine. Gave it 24 hours still, 10 and 1022. You probably just have some unfermentables in there. I mean, how long has it been fermenting? What temperature? You may have some unfermentables in there. I mean, if you have a little glucose, you could probably throw it in there. If not, you could probably, you know, raise the temperature a little bit. What's going on, Ian? I'm assuming that's my brother Ian. Doing good, brother. How about yourself? Y'all that don't know, Still Talking has a great podcast on Mondays. I think they're still doing it on Mondays. I missed the last couple. But yeah, they do an awesome podcast on Mondays. Y'all got to check them out. Ian is our brother from another mother. What's going on, Gary? Awesome. I love to hear that, man. That's good to hear, brother. Sister, Linda. I'm glad they're enjoying it. Hope they're learning a lot. What's going on, Dylan? Hey, Wendell. What's up, brother? I ain't seen you in a little bit. Yeah, it's a little bit early. It's starting to warm up a little bit. We got oh, you're fine. Can't stick around long. If you do a stripping run and cut 4 shots in heads, a very common question we get asked a lot. A lot of people, when they do stripping runs, they just strip. They don't remove anything. So they just strip everything off and be done with it just to get that distillate off, and they don't make any cuts at all. Some people will do a stripping run. They'll cut just the 4 shots. So they just take a very little bit of the first off, and that's it. They let the rest go with all the heads and everything in there. And then some people, will make cuts, and they'll, take out everything that they can, make decent cuts, and then run it again. No right or wrong way. I think taking the 4 shots off is a pretty good idea in the high heads. There's really not a lot of alcohol in that to begin with, so carrying that forward, I don't think is the best of ideas. It really depends on the distillate, what your plans are, and how you're going to age it, and things of that matter, and how far into the heads you go. But you definitely you can take the 4 shots off, and you can take the high heads off if you don't want to deal with them again. I think if you take them off then, you have fewer to worry about later. But If you do take them off, you still, on your final run, you'll still have some to remove, because basically we learned that you'll find heads completely through the runs, and there'll be a little bit of forest completely through the runs as well. So there's always going to be some. So the next time you heat it up and you go through that temperature change and rising, right, you're probably going to get a little bit to cook off then as well. So you can, after if you take them off during the stripping run, you can take off a little bit, but we're going to use our senses. We're going to use our smell, our feel, and looking at it, how it hits the surface of whatever jar it's stripping in, whatever. And we're going to kind of go by the smell and the feel and what it looks like, and judge and make those cuts regardless of whether we keep them and carry them forward or not. So I try to take out the high heads and fours myself, and the lower heads and stuff I don't worry about as much, and I'll just take them off of the next run, because there's some low heads that if you're going to age for a long period of time, that might be a little bit beneficial, that you can get some decent esters out of them. So yeah, on your spirit run, if you even if you do take some out, you should probably, you're going to definitely go through the smell, taste, and go through all that to make a proper cut. Got a 5-gallon bever. Yeah, it's a little tougher. Generally a diammonium phosphate or a Fermax or a Fermo. A lot of people like Fermo, and it's pretty much works for all the different distillates. You can use different nutrients. Some people use different nutrients for different distillates. There's different needs based on each one, and a lot of times professionals will gauge how much nitrogen is in what they're actually fermenting, and they'll reduce the amount of nutrients needed based on the amount of nitrogen that is in whatever they're fermenting. So there's no given set amount, and it's something that you don't want to way overdo, so but learning about, Fermo is probably a good all around. Everybody seems to be happy with. Organic, doesn't have the urea that a lot of people complain about. So it's a pretty good starting point, and it's a really good, nutrient to use. And I think Amazon probably carries it. Your brew stores will carry it. It's called Fermo, Ferm-O, and I think that just organic. But it in like malted, mashes, you're probably not going to need any, but high sugar mashes, you're going to need more. Like just corn, corn has a little, but unless it's malted, it doesn't have a whole lot. So you could use, if it's just an all corn and you're converting, you could probably use a little bit of nutrients along with that corn. It certainly wouldn't hurt, but not a full dose, just maybe a fraction, maybe a quarter of what you would normally use. So it's just a little bit less. But yeah, we can. But yeah, a lot of professionals they use different nutrients, just like people use different yeast. So it's something a lot of shiners don't do, but a lot of professionals will. They'll use different nutrients for different, for brandies, they'll use specific ones. For whiskeys that don't have the malts, they'll use a certain one. And for rum, certainly they'll have probably a special one that they like to use for rum. So definitely a good question. It's something, I'm reading about just not too long ago, actually, and how a lot of them use spectrosity. I guess gas spectrography. Yeah. When I'm drinking, I can't say it. If I'm sober, I can say that. But yeah, we'll talk about your bever here a little bit. Have you used it yet? That's the next question we got for you, Adam. Have you used it yet? down collecting wild yeast, and I mean deep. Yeah, it's easy to do, man. It is. Nut crack yeast. Okay, well, I've heard a lot of people, talk about wanting to use vaginal yeast. I don't know. What we got? What we gonna end up with? Um, Probably not. People tend to run the stripping runs a little hotter and faster than they do the spirit run. So the stripping runs generally done a little bit hotter and faster than the spirit run. Good question. I agree. Yeah, yeah. Once you start working on it, man, you become a plumber, an engineer. Yeah, you'll be an expert in several fields. Hello, Miss Lisa. How are you tonight? All right, that's Phil Billy, not me. I'm a lot more handsome than Phil Billy, in case you hadn't noticed. But yeah, let's see. Adding watermelon syrup to the mash for distilling. Will the syrup flavor actually transfer to the liquor? Yeah, yeah. It will. The distillation process removes some. That's what the whole purpose for is. When we distill water, is to remove impurities. And a lot of times when we put stuff like that in a mash, that's considered an impurity. Then not a lot of gets removed. But when you're doing brandies like that, it's good to have flavor in the actual mash, and it's good that way for taste. Okay, and then it's also good to infuse with a lot of flavor because the infusion tends to be a bit more nose heavy, and the mash flavor tends to be more on your tongue. So if you do both, you'll get a good, smell when you smell it, and you'll get a good taste of it when you taste it. So a lot of people will do both. Not saying, if you flavor the mash, it's not going to smell, or if you just infuse, you're not going to taste it, but it does help. Yeah, the taller your column, the more reflux you're going to get. So, it depends on what you're going to do with it. If you're going to stick with bourbons and things like that, you're going to want to keep it fairly short, just enough to hold your copper. If you're going to want to do some reflux uh, and have some reflux, you're going to use, a chamber or two. Um, you can go with a short spool and then chambers, and then, on up. If you want to use a deflegmator, you can use a longer spool with a deflegmator on the top, which a lot of people do. That's a pretty common column setup for like a lot of these keg setups that they sell. It has basically a 24, 28-inch spool. We call them spools. And on top of that, it'll have a deflegmator, and you can just stuff, and it'll have a sight glass. So you can stuff that spool with some, copper, and have that in the vapor path, and get some reflux out of that. And then with your defleg, you can get more out of that. But that's more for higher proof stuff when you want to turn out a higher proof. But for lower proof, just use a shorter spool and go into your elbow and into your condenser right off the steel, and you'll maintain more flavor that way. Unless you're going to use, of course, some jar rigs or a thumper or something like that, then it just how much water and flavor you want to carry forward versus how much neutral you want it. The taller column with the deflegmator will be better for like a vodka, higher proof stuff, um, and the shorter going into either a thumper or jar rigs would be better for your like your bourbons or stuff that you want to brandies that you want to infuse. And as far as the packing, it's generally mine that I get is like 4 inches wide. I guess 4 or 5 inches wide. Wait a minute, that's like 6 inches at least, right? All right, so it's like that wide. So I just roll it and get it to about the size of the spool itself. And inside one of my gaskets, my spool, it has like a drain. It's got the big holes in it. Looks like a like a tub drain trap that just catches hair. And I use that as my gasket to keep the copper from sliding on into the steel, right? So I can use it that way, and it doesn't drop off into the steel, and it'll hold it in there. Some people have like screen meshes on on their gaskets that they can use on the ferrule, so that works as well. But when you get modular like that, Dylan, you can kind of switch between them. You can change everything up, so everything's like it's like Lincoln Logs, man. You can Legos or something. You can just start making your own creations, because you got elbows, you got 45s, you got tubes, spools of different lengths. You got deflegmators. You got the inline infusers that you can build and create. It's the sky's the limit to what you can do. Especially once you start throwing in some butterfly valves and stuff, and start diverting and doing a lot of that stuff that I do. What's going on, Slacks Mold? What's up, Dave? Good to see you, brother. You're welcome, Art. Oh, Clint's tardy. Got to put him in timeout. He's tardy. What's going on, brother? Tractor grading the driveway. You seen these? I guess they're not new, but they look like a big ass roto tiller, and they're really heavy freaking duty. And basically, what they're doing is, when your gravel driveway gets a lot of dirt and grass and shit on it, instead of having them come in with just another layer of gravel, these damn things, man, they just go through there and just till it all up, and all the dirt and clods and stuff kind of drop down, and it just kind of refreshes the gravel again, man. That's cool. That's pretty cool. What's going on, Michael Newsom? Hello from Kentucky to Kentucky, brother. Where in Kentucky? Good to have you with us here, Billy. Thoughts on charging my thumper with snow cone icy syrups? Awesome. I do it. I've got a big old jug of watermelon up there that I'm going to be using for infusions for my watermelon. So yeah, it's a good idea, brother. Sure is, and it's cheap, and it carries the flavor forward, and if you infuse with it, it carries it pretty good. But it's not too expensive. I think it's probably one of the cheaper. You get a whole gallon of that syrup, so it's one of the cheaper infusions that you can get. It's pretty. The stuff I was getting was pretty cheap. What's up, Tex? Good to see you, brother. Awesome, man. That's a good feeling. Done the vinegar run. Got his new 20-gallon in. That's awesome, brother. Oh yeah, it's not my idea either, man. They've been using those for a long time, and and it's good for post flavoring. If you don't mind post flavoring, it's excellent for post flavoring. I mean, it'll make an excellent watermelon crawl if you want it to. If you don't mind the color not being perfectly clear, and having a little bit of red tint to it, and having a good watermelon flavor and proofing it down, and something that you can drink. Not damn thing wrong with it, brother. Yeah, a lot of people will use that to flavor with. It's probably not the quality of a Turani, and I don't think it's TTB. I don't think you're gonna find it on a TTB list or whatever. But what's going on, Kenny Parker? Good to see you, brother. But you know, it's good for post flavoring. You know, it's perfectly fine. I mean, Kool-Aid with sugar. A lot of people use Kool-Aid. A lot of people use, yeah, they probably use those little box juices. You know, it's, but yeah, the syrups do make a pretty good post flavoring too, and they're good for infusions. But let's get back to Adam. Have you run your still yet, Adam? Yeah, you'll start out with just the one nutrient, but keep us up now. Let's know, have you used it yet? If not, just kind of set it up. You don't have to run it. You know, just set it up with, you know, full of water, not full, about half full of water, and put it together like you would normally do. You know, don't over tighten those gaskets. I will say, you know, but learn, you know, how tight you can tighten everything up, or learn how tight you can go before you break one of your gaskets, and then, you know, you can immediately start ordering gaskets like a lot of people do. But you can find any leaks you might have, and just boil some water and run some boiling water through it. And it's all stainless, should be pretty clean. If not, you can get some heads if you got some heads, or high proof, you know, whatever, vodka, or if you got pure grain, or you can use isopropyl alcohol if you can get, you know, high percentage of it, and just use that with a white rag and just rub that, polish the inside of that stainless with it, man. Rub real hard. There's a lot of times there's some rubbing compounds and stuff that they shine that stuff up with that stick around. So if you can get rid of most of those, it definitely helps a lot. I see what you're saying. I thought it was pretty cool though. It looked like a big ass rototiller, but it was like, you know, on steroids. And it, of course, it was enclosed with steel. And I think the tractor was pulling it, maybe, or a backhoe or something. Maybe I can't remember exactly what was, maybe in a backhoe. But whatever it was pretty slick. I don't know if it's PTO or what, but it was pretty damn cool. I don't know if it was on the excavator. No, I think it's probably a PTO or something similar. Or maybe that old motor. I can't remember exactly. All I remember is focusing on those wheels looking like a rototiller on those gravels. But pretty good idea. I got some friends that live out in the country, and that's a constant, you know, constant thing, building up the gravels. Before you know it, they all get pressed down, and you have to keep adding more. Get a good base though. After you get a good base, you should be pretty good to go. Costs a lot to blacktop that stuff. Yeah, we got a lot of red clay here too. A lot of red clay. That's why it's so good, I guess, for tobacco and stuff around here in central Kentucky. A lot of tobacco is grown here, and that soil is pretty conductive. Cool. Yeah, I've seen some people use, you know, the fertilizer as well, and you know, I've heard a lot of people don't like the urea. I know that Fermax has just a touch of urea in it, and it's a food grade urea, so it's not like, you know, your that you put out in the field, you know, ammonium nitrate type stuff. But yeah, it's best to use like something designed for it instead of ammonium nitrate. You know, it's kind of hard to, you know, if you experience with it and know how to dose it. You know, I guess you could, but yeah, you have to be careful with it. It burn that yeast up. But yeah, a lot of people use diammonium phosphate, which pretty much most of your DAP will have a touch of food grade urea with it, not much. But the Fermo I know doesn't, and a lot of the Fermax and Fermades have very little, if any. I know Fermo, I don't think has any. But yeah, a lot of people, there's a lot of different things that you can put in there. I mean, I know a lot of people used to talk about using tomato juice and tomatoes and things like that, where, I was always like, no, that's horrible to use because it doesn't have, the yan and fan, the yeast assimilable nitrogen and the free amino nitrogen with that you need for the yeast. But after, not being stubborn and reading more about it, it doesn't have the yan and fan, true, but it does have a lot of other essential nutrients and stuff in it that are very, very beneficial. So, a lot of people do the vitamins. If you do vitamins, make sure that you get vitamins without iron. Iron's something that you don't want to be adding. But yeah, vitamin B and Epsom salts. A lot of people use little pinches of salts, and but yeah, definitely. I use DAP, and I'll sometimes throw in some gypsum, and I've got some calcium, and then I'll lower pH with some acid blend, and then go from there. Actually, that's a really good question, Dylan. The hole that's on the side, you can put a valve in it, just like a half-inch valve, open and close. That way, when you're done with your run, you can just open up your valve and let the air dissipate and equalize so you don't implode or have any issues there. Um, but yeah, you could put a hole in the center, and do your bulkhead there, or I would probably do it that way, and that way you could, in that half inch, that's threaded, right? It's going to be a valve that's on there that's got threads on, mounted into it, but it's going to have threads coming out. You can, a lot of times you could put like a thermometer on that if you want to put a thermometer on there, or if you wanted to refill it, you could put a little funnel on there and be able to fill it up without having to take the lid off. If you wanted to, you know, run it a second time, you just shut everything down, let it open it up, and your column up, and just open that valve up and let the steam off, and then pour your stuff back, your first run back in there and run it again if you want to do it that way. There's a lot of different things you could do. But having that valve on the top, I like having that. After each run's done, you're finished, you run all your tails out, you can open that up, and you don't have to worry about the lid sucking in and tearing up your pot or anything like that. Yeah, I think he was talking about going 2 inches. That's what I think he was talking about earlier. But yeah, I'd definitely go with 2 inch. It's the cheapest. Now, one thing that you might run into if you start running into weight, mine, the way I do mine, it's heavy as hell, and there's no way my pot can support it. So I have hooks in the ceiling above, my stove, or outside if I have to run it. I have to do it near something that can support it because it's very, very heavy. So it's got way too much weight. Once you start adding a lot of stuff and valves and stuff on it, it gets really heavy. But it works. I just have supports for it, and that works. It's worked for me. But yeah, you can definitely start packing on a lot of weight that lid can't handle, but a keg can. So that's another consideration about kegs is they can handle quite a bit more column than your bevers. And, you know, kegs, 15 gallons, you know, get you a little 4-inch or 6-inch ferrule cut on the side of the top for a clean out. Just use that. Have a little bit bigger keg, 35 bucks, you know, and if you can find somebody that can weld that ferrule on there for you, you can run quite a bit more weight on your cat or on your column and stuff. Yeah, this one's a heavy duty. It wasn't like, you know, yeah, it was badass. It was going deep. It was probably going 4 to 6, you know, inches deep. It was going, I mean, it wasn't, you know, regrading, but it was going pretty deep. Yeah, yeah, that's right, Brian. Yeah, mine's thin too. I mean, the football steels are a little bit thicker and they have a little, you know, they're kind of shaped, so they have, with that shape gives a little more rigidity, but it's still nowhere near strong enough. For those simple columns, it'll do those, but you start adding on a lot of stuff like I've got, you gotta have you gotta have supports. Yeah, yeah. I tell you though, you know, sometimes finding a dome lid might just be better off just getting a keg and getting a 4-inch ferrule and having it welded in and not having to worry about, because those things are pretty stiff. I don't know. I guess after 4 inches welded in there, it might lose a little structural integrity, but not a lot. Those kegs are pretty sturdy on the lids, on the tops. If you go to 3 inch, you probably be a little stronger. But I'd say a keg, you know, unless you got supports, keg's good. But if you've got supports, then you'll be fine. I've used a wire as a coated wire on mine, and it seems to work out real well. What I've always done. Will do. I'll let you know, Tammy. No, hell no, brother. That's what we're here for. I get mad when people don't ask me. Hey, there's a lot of people listening that are learning right now. That, you know, there's quite a few people that listen and there's a lot of people that listen that aren't live. Probably 90% of the people that listen to this show don't listen to it live. They just catch it during the week sometime and learn. Because believe it or not, most everybody, every beginner has the same question. So, you know, on here we do get repetitive in our answers, and you know, going back and looking at some of the old episodes will help a lot. So I always recommend that for anybody. Just go back at least a month or two and just start watching the episodes, and you'll see a lot of the same questions getting asked again and again, and you'll learn just from listening to it. But everybody has the same questions, so you'll learn a lot just watching old episodes. And a lot of people, you know, will learn from your questions. So I encourage all the questions that you want, brother, because if you're not asking them, you know, it's not being answered. Well, if that's your goal, I wouldn't really spend a whole lot of time and money and effort in your 13. Um, just grab a keg and start using it. I mean, 35 bucks, 40 bucks on I don't know where you're at, but I know here usually you can find them in Ohio and Tennessee for 30 bucks, 20, 25, hell, cheap as dirt. But you know, they're a little harder to find around here. I think everybody gobbles them up real quick and uses them in Kentucky, so they don't last long. And I don't know if you've all seen the R2D2 and the C3PO, you know, that shows them landing, and it says, I think we've landed in Kentucky. And the next thing you know, they've been converted into some steel. So that's, yeah, there's a lot of people that listen in. Kenny, I do encourage people to ask the questions, though, if they have them. But yeah, finding somebody to weld your keg I can't recommend highly enough than going all electric and keg. Because, you know, when people see that keg sitting over there, they don't really see those ferrules on the side. They don't think about it. All they see is a beer keg. That doesn't say moonshine still to them. You know, you got an old copper pot over there with a cape and everything, and, you know, big cap and, you know, lint arm, and people are like, that's moonshine still, you know. So there is some, you know, a little bit of camouflage with a keg still. I agree with Clint. Just save your money and do it. Just save your money and get the ferrules, and don't have to be a copper ferrule. Somebody's asked me last week about copper ferrules. They had a big 4-inch copper ferrule, and I was like, man, you could probably just give somebody in the business. I think they're in North Carolina. Hopefully they asked their question on the militia page, but they had a big copper ferrule, and I'd say, you know, somebody would probably, in exchange for that copper ferrule, weld you a good stainless one onto a keg, which is all you need really, and just use that copper mesh, you know, unless you plan on going copper plumbing, which is perfectly fine, you know. But you don't have to have that copper ferrule. That first one doesn't have to be copper, and it's easier to find somebody's going to, you know, weld stainless to stainless, and then you can put your copper, you know, spool, get a copper spool to start your column, put it on that. That's right. Where there's fraternities, there's beer kegs. You might get lucky and just find one out in the field somewhere. Might be a few college boys laying around drunk, you know, just catch a kind of tiptoe out there with it. Make a little run. All right, Dylan, we'll take it easy, brother. We're here every Wednesday and Saturday at 8 Eastern. So start planning. We can work up everything that you need to get and have your little toolkit ready to go, brother. Yeah, Greg. Yeah, we put. They make some good stainless elements. You don't necessarily have to use like a water heater element, but you can. But the Nord and several other companies make a good quality stainless element that you can put in there and get your little SCR or PID and start using, you know, electric instead of gas. Auto correction erection. What's up, Jeff? Good to see you, brother. Auto erection. Damn, I wish I had one of those. I used to. Kind of like waking up after a good dream. You haven't seen the 5-gallon buckets that have elements in them? I've never seen plastic buckets with elements. And, you know, it's okay to put your boiling water in and do all that, but as far as having the heat of an element in it at a constant heat at a specific area right next to it, I would tend to say no. I wouldn't dream of that. Yeah, the water heater ones, they rust out. They'll break up on you. Definitely want to go with the stainless. Denord makes pretty good ones. They make some that are bent, so you can kind of get a little bit more element for a smaller pot if you have a smaller pot. But for a keg, you know, straight element's fine. Some people use a couple elements in a keg and use two, kind of, you know, off center, so they're pointing different directions, or like this, you know, and you can basically run two to get everything up to temp, and then once it's cooking, you know, once it's boiling off, you can dial them down a little bit and get a constant good drip out of it. I appreciate it. Let's see. So they cook low country boiling. Yeah, definitely. I prefer the SCR too. The PIDs tend to cycle a little bit, where the SCRs are more constant and definitely more reliable. Definitely SCR for sure. Swamp buckets. I'm gonna have to Google these swamp buckets. I'm Googling for those that say I Google everything. I don't know about swamp buckets, so I'm Googling it. Yeah, I think it's a plastic bucket. All right, let's see. Swamp bucket seafood boiler. All right, I'm gonna watch this real quick. Yeah, I don't think so. I'm not gonna do it. No, I'm seeing it now. I understand how it works because there's liquid in there, and as long as there's liquid in there, it's kind of like boiling water in a styrofoam cup, kind of thing. Um, but yeah, I'm not gonna get boiling alcohol anywhere near plastic. Thing when you have a mash, you don't just have ethanol. So everybody looks at ethanol on the charts, the compatibility charts, and ethanol won't really phase that HDPE, which is what that bucket's made from. It's a high density polyethylene, most likely, and so alcohol doesn't affect that, but acetone does. And you got boiling acetone in that plastic, and you're going to be getting microplastics off in your vapor, man. And that's something that's really a lot people are a lot more conscious about these days are the microplastics. Uh, so that's definitely a concern. I would say no. I'm not going to recommend it just for that reason. Um, Maybe for boiling the water or something. It just I don't know that I'd even do that. I just soon drill a hole in an old stock pot, aluminum. You can use an old aluminum pot or something cheap. You don't have to have stainless or copper to boil water in. You can boil water in an old aluminum pot. You just don't want to put a real acidic mash in there that's going to boiling acid basically inside the aluminum. But yeah, for water and sugar, it might be okay. But I mean, if you got a big old pot, metal pot, or a keg, a lot of people get a keg for $35. I'm sure probably cheaper than that 5-gallon bucket. I know. $35 keg, and they'll just cut the tops out of it and have the handles, right? And just cut the whole top off of it and use it as a 15-gallon boiler. Just then they use it for shrimp and a lot of things. That's an old way to get you a good sized boiling pot for $35. Where else are you going to get a stainless pot with handles? Doesn't have a lid. I guess you could probably the lid that you cut off. You could probably rig some little tangs on it that you could use it as a lid. Uh, but yeah, it makes a good little boiling pot. So if you want to go that route, you can just put your element straight into your keg that way and just use it for a boiler. If you want to go that route and have another keg as your steel, that'd be a $35 for for the keg and probably another 35, 40 for the element. You know, I don't know. Fillbilly's got them. They've quite a few people sell them. I think he might carry the Nords or can get them. But yeah, good stainless. No, Greg, I'm glad you asked. I hadn't seen them doing that. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't use those really. It's I'd just be concerned about, especially for food. You know, I'd be worried about microplastics getting off in there, and you know they've just found a few years back that you know, setting soda 2-liter jugs out in the sun where it gets hot was leaching, you know, microplastics into the beverages and stuff. So I just tend not to do anything with plastics when it gets hot with food. Yeah, old kegs with the top cut off make excellent pots. And even those aluminum kegs that you can't use, you know, for steel so much, if you can get them old aluminums for next to nothing. They almost give them to you. And those work fine for boiling water in. Are they, Richard? Yeah, they're always, you know, every time I look on Facebook, they're always freaking in Cincinnati or Tennessee. They're never none around here. Let me see what we got here on Facebook. Let me see here. This picture of my niece. I'm hard on that. All right, there was a marketplace. Okay. $20. Oh my God, I gotta go see if I can get that. $20 right here. 5-gallon. Thumper right there. Down to the yeah. So let's see, there's a mini keg, $30 mini keg. Budweiser. Here's a tall one for $25. Here's like 3 or 4 for $2.50. They cray. CO2 tank, stainless. Here's another 75. Oh, it's a table. LED keg table. Here's one they've made a couple of brew kettles out of that they've got sitting on a turkey fryer. $300. They jacked the price up after they cut the top out of it. Yeah, they're not. These $20 one, West Point, Indiana. Always the cheaper ones a little further. But yeah, you just gotta look around, keep watching every week. You know, there's 60. Just depends on where you're at. You can always find one though. You just keep looking. You'll get one. But that $20 one. See when that one put up. Side has dent in the picture. That's not a bad dent. Interesting. Let's go get that mark. $20. And that's a pony. That's one of the good. That's a big full size. You know, the full size pony keg, not the little tall thin ones. It's the short fat ones. Those are the good ones. And that's a stainless one too. So, hell yeah. Hopefully I can get that tomorrow. Do they, Clint? Wally World? Yeah, it's awesome, Greg, and it's very ingenious. But I'd worry too much about microplastics. The more they find out about them these days, it's just not worth the risk. And you know, you get you a good stainless pot or aluminum pot, Goodwill, $10. You can get you a big old stock pot. Yard sales. If you like going to yard sales, flea markets, you can find you a good old cook pot for cheap. Estate sales, good place to go because a lot of these kids these days they don't cook you know, like like we used to, you know, our grandparents used to. So when their grandparents and their parents, you know, pass away and they're handling the estate, they don't want all them big ass pots, you know, and they're not going to do any canning and all that stuff. So you can, you know, go to estate sales and pick that stuff up pretty cheaply too. Ryan's got 2 for $30. Awesome deal, bro. Yeah, they're not open. We don't have a 24-hour one close to here. We got, hold on. Is that Walmart neighborhood market 24-hour? Okay, I don't think so. Yeah, we used to have one here, but it's not anymore. Oh, I love Wally World, man. They got everything. It's almost like, not quite as good as Amazon. I like getting on Amazon and find stuff. I just don't like spending a lot of money in gas driving to all over town. I live in a pretty big town. I'm sure I could probably buy pretty much everything here in town, but you know that includes dealing with traffic and driving 20, 30 miles across town and, you know, 45 minutes in the traffic driving, spending, you know, 10 in gas to just, you know, buy a $5 item. Yeah. I like buying and having it delivered. And you know, a lot of people, small businesses sell a lot of stuff on Amazon. You know, everybody thinks Amazon sells everything. It's just Amazon. But there's a lot of small businesses that sell a lot of stuff on Amazon. So, you know, you can support small business and buy on Amazon at the same time. A lot of people don't realize that. They think everything just comes straight from Amazon and, you know, they're getting all the money. But they do, you know, the mom and pops out there that do sell to them now, they put the pinch on them to sell it as cheap as they can because they do have competition. They let them know, you know, you need to keep the price down. But there's a lot of mom and pops on Amazon selling a lot of small business. You can find them. Yeah, I mean, if yeah, especially the milk jugs. If it's just pure ethanol, it's not a problem. But we don't distill pure ethanol. We can't get pure ethanol, you know, unless we use a molecular sieve and take it all the way up. I mean, we can get most of the other stuff out of there, but there's still going to be some acetones and some other things in our distillate, and those don't do well with HTP. So I heard a lot of people in the past was like, oh, you can store in plastic just fine. You can put your heads and tails in a plastic bucket for an all paints run and all this. I'm like, I wouldn't be putting heads in a bucket, you know. Like, why? Ethanol doesn't bother. And I'm like, well, what else is in heads? You know, and you start looking at ethyl acetate and acetone on the charts and look how it reacts to HDPE. It's slow, but it will dissolve it. So, you know, they have a ratings like A, B, C, D, you know, A being a good rating where it's pretty much inert to certain things. And I think HDPE and LDPE with acetone and ethyl acetates have probably like a C rating with it. So you're getting some plastic. That's what that's doing. What's going on, James? Good to have you in here, brother. Yeah, those are fine. What is it, about 7.5 gallon? Yeah, those are cool. Actually, I looked at those for something small to do smaller runs in. I ended up getting a Bever. Got an 18.5 gallon Bever to do on the stove and run smaller runs and stuff. You know. And kegs, I got keg steels too. I got a 7.5 and 15. And tomorrow I have 5 if it's still available. It's $20 that I looked. It ain't pretty, but I don't care. I bet the inside looks just fine. I'm glad I saw it. There's some rye bourbon barrels, $45, 53. Man, those are nice and shiny too. They look like they just came out. 45, but hell, you can get a damn wood 53-gallon wood barrel. Bet you a few elements in that. That'd be fine. Huh? It leaks all over the damn place. Awesome, brother. That's good. That's a good setup. So have you got your column to come off of it yet? Have you purchased that, or got your little whiskey head to come off of it, or still shopping for that, or gonna build it? Yeah, especially the smaller beverers. You know, it's they're hard to make cuts on. You know, the 5 gallon and the 7, 8 gallon pots. They're a lot. You know, 8 gallons. They're a lot harder to make cuts on than a 15, 20 gallon pot. You know, they're a lot tighter cuts. They're less defined too. So it's tough once you learn on a little 3 pot bever. I'd agree wholeheartedly. Once you run the bigger ones, it'd be like, wow, look how much I'm getting, and it's so much easier, and it doesn't take that much longer. Especially once you go from small pipe on a 8 gallon or 10 gallon to inch and a half, 2 inch on a 18, 15 to 18, 20 gallon. Um, they cook off just as faster than an 8. You got twice as much, more than twice as much in there. So cool, awesome. That's great, brother. See, you're handy. So you're ready to run that son bitch. Did you put a clean out in the top, or are you waiting to do that? Clean out a little 3 or 4 inch, depending on how big your arms are. I can't get my arm in a 3 inch, but a 4 I can squeeze it in there and kind of clean the sides a little bit. But just having it open like that, you can hit pretty much everywhere you need to hit with a pressure washer, and you know clean it out every once in a while. Yeah, I've had pretty good luck just setting mine to the next to the old. Well, it wasn't outside though. It wasn't like real cold, and it didn't have to heat up a lot. So I'm just basically in the basement heating from 70 degrees up, 60 some degrees up. So love that. How's it going, Brownie? Brian? Perfect. So any questions about mash making for the beginners? Have you started making any mashes yet, Greg? I wonder what happened to Adam. Back in Florida. Coming off the pot with 1/2 inch, 2 half-gallon thumper jars, reduced to 3/8 worm, 15 foot. Hell yeah. Is that off a keg? Oh, pot. So you're probably got the beverage pot. You did just say that, didn't you? Look, 13, yeah. Yeah, it's yeah, once you go from half-inch coming off that pot, if you ran 2-inch, because like the 15s and the 13s, I think the football steels have 2-inch, inch and a half to 2.5 inch. I know mine has, the 18.5 has 2.5, and I know the 15 does, and I think the 13 has 2.5. But I step it down to 2, and man, I tell you, once you open up that vapor path like that, it goes a lot quicker. You'll get through your runs a lot quicker. And I think one thing that happens is I think when you have smaller plumbing, you tend to build a little bit more pressure in the pot. Follow me? And when you build up pressure, the temperature shoots up. And when you get that temperature shooting up higher and running it hotter and faster, you tend to cook everything off at once more. So you're getting, kind of a blending effect off of it, where your heads kind of get carried all the way through because it all wants to cook off at once, instead of, I know we don't do fractional, but at least when you're bringing it up slow and low and slow, and you get to the 196 point, and you can hold it there, I think you tend to get a lot more off that when you have that open vapor path, because it'll hold at that temperature a little better and longer than if you had that pressure behind it, because it's harder to control the temperature because of the pressure, right? So I think having the larger pipe coming off of it definitely helps. Yeah. So a lot of people, Tex will put I'm sorry, mud flat will put a bulkhead fitting on there and run an inch and a half or two out of that, and make it a little bit more, I guess, versatile, where you can add a lot of the other stuff. But, I mean, you've already got your jar rigs, you got everything down and done. So, I doubt that, other than time, and a little bit of blending and smearing, it's not going to be worth that much trouble. But kegs, going to a keg, man. I love the keg stills are awesome. I used a keg for a long time. Long time. When I came up with the bypass back in the early 80s, when I was in college, we ran a beer keg. Yep, cool. 1 inch with the half going in it like a lobby. That's cool. Yeah, yeah. The larger your vapor path, it cooks off quicker for sure, and you can regulate your temperatures a little better. That's one thing I like about having it come off. I noticed I didn't have as much pressure built up, and temperature was easier to keep it from wanting to shoot up. Yeah, for the beginners, it's what's going on, Robert? Likes his popcorn, something's moonshine. That's awesome, man. Good stuff, brother. But yeah, for the beginners, there's other than the steel, there's going to be some certain tools and stuff that you're going to need. You're going to need hydrometers, triple scale hydrometer to measure the amount of sugars in your mash, and not just like table sugar. We're talking about converted sugars as well, the sugars that you convert from the starch to the grain, which is what you're going to learn to do. And that's where you get your cheapest sugars, and your best sugars come from grain conversion. So it's not as hot. It'll produce a lot, and once you get it down to a science, you can make sugar cheaper with converting your yellow dent number 2 starchy corn into sugars. by using the amylase, in the conversion process. So it's cheaper to make sugars that way than it is to go buy a bag of sugar. Now, it's a little easy to buy a bag of sugar, but when you do, it mashes in quick, it converts quick, it everything's quick about it, and nothing's good about it. So in distilling, you learn in mashing and distilling, time and patience means a lot. So if you tend to rush things, it tends to show up in the final product. But using like pure sugar, it'll make a hotter. It's a hotter liquor than if you use a converted grain from starch. Converted starch from your grains. No, I haven't looked yet, Tex. I'm gonna look right now though. I'm scrolling, brother. You got the name of Korea. Yahoo Shine, cream shine, chocolate cream shine. I'm not a big person in creams, but that looks pretty good. Heck, I'm not saying, where'd you post it? We got so much activity in there. That's good though, man. Did you see that shelf Jay Newsom posted with the Chevy pickup bed converted into a shelf? No, I don't see it. Don't see it. Oh, wait. No, that's Big Beard still. All right, I don't see it, brother. The militia page. Yeah, sanitation is important. Keeping things washed, for the most part, a lot of stuff just requires a good rinsing and, just to get soap and water clean. A lot of times sanitation comes, when you're doing wines that you want to keep for, as a wine, and you're going to age and you're not going to distill. Then you really have to kind of focus on sanitation and doing everything right. What would I recommend doing to make watermelon wine? Well, first thing, I would take out all the pulp. Some people like let it sit a day, but the pulp gives it kind of a melony flavor. So getting the pulp out of there, definitely helps. I wouldn't use pectic enzymes. That creates, a headsy wine. With all the, I should back up. I use pectic enzymes for a lot of fruits. Watermelon wouldn't be one of them because I want to remove the pulp. It's after you remove the pulp, you won't need the pectic enzymes, and that would make kind of a headsy watermelon wine. But is this something that you wouldn't mind back sweetening and adding a little flavor to, or is it something that you want to keep as a strict fruit wine? Because we were talking earlier, a lot of people will fortify their wine with a little bit of shine, and you can take some shine and take like the syrup we were talking about for the Slurpee syrup, for the snow cone syrup. You can mix a little bit and that in there to get a good sweet watermelony wine flavor. A lot of people use the Jolly Rancher candies. They'll dissolve those in alcohol and add that and get a good sweet, interesting flavor if you like those, the candy. But yeah, a lot of people use the Star San for winemaking. I use it. Yeah, I keep everything pretty. You got to keep everything pretty clean for winemaking and beer making. Whereas in distillation, we're pigs when it comes to all that. When you learn the winemaking, you tend to be a lot more clean as you should be. But a lot of brandy makers and distillers, they just rinse it out and let it go, and they're not, if they get a lactose, sometimes they'll sanitize to get rid of the lactose so they don't get it early. But for the most part, everything that gets distilled cooks anything bad off anyway. So most people get lazy and they don't. But yeah, Star San is a really good cleaner. It's very concentrated, so a jar will last you for a long, long, long time, and supposedly no rinse. It doesn't leave a bad after flavor. It's a kind of an acid-based cleaning thing, so not something I'd want to let sit on copper for a long time because it is acidic. But it's good for general cleaning. I wouldn't clean my copper with it. I found something to clean my copper with, but like your fermentation vessels and your mixing paddles and all the stuff that comes into contact. A lot of people use different methods to mix with, spoons, anything like that. You can use the Star San in. It's but for the most part with distilling, just soap and water, rinsing your copper out each time, getting a good rinse on it right after you run it, and get all the acid and everything backset and everything out of there, and running through the worm, blowing everything out. That helps a lot. Yep. Running a vinegar run will help too. Yeah, that this acid in the vinegar and stuff. A lot of the if you get some oxidation on your copper, help take a lot of that stubborn stuff off, and but yeah, Star San's real good. It's cheap, and I mean it's not real expensive once you consider how much you use per use, because it just takes like a capful for a gallon. Man, it's very concentrated. But the more stubborn stuff, um, you can use a little stronger. A lot of people too do a lot of sanitation with hot water. When you're doing your mash, getting that water over 160 degrees to dump on your fruit, to kill any bacteria off and the bird shit, the wild yeast, everything on there, bad bacteria, Cetobacters from, yeah, it's, dumping really hot water on that to help kill things off. That goes a long, long way than trying to just cold mash in. Cold mashing tends to get kind of nasty because of that get sanitized right off the bat, pasteurized kind of, right off the bat. Yeah, it's good for a lot of stuff. I keep it around. I keep a spray bottle with it. It's good for countertops, a lot of stuff. Sure is. And it's cheap. It's so concentrated. But like cutting blocks, stuff like that, it's good for that. It's not a cleaner, it's a sanitizer. So keep that in mind. It's not a cleaner, it's a sanitizer. I think a lot of people tend to try to use it for cleaning when it's just for sanitizing. Well, Jimmy, that's a problem, brother. But I make a lot of wines, and be real sanitary when you make it. Try to use all watermelon juice. Don't try to add any water to it at all. Just use the watermelon juice to ferment with. I just take all my pulp, blend it, run it through a screen, a strainer, or a mesh bag, and get all the liquid off. and then I just add some nutrients to that, and just ferment the juice alone. But as a wine, if you wanted to, like Philly did, add a little bit of syrup, or add some, take a pint of shine and dissolve some of those. A lot of people love using those. I like using them too. The hard candies. You don't have to use the expensive Jolly Ranchers. You can use cheaper rock candies, cheaper stuff. But those are good. Once you dissolve them in some liquor, pour in your wine, fortify your wine, get your proof up a little bit, and so you could use just a little bit of vodka. You wouldn't have to, or pure grain or whatever, and just a little bit to dissolve them in, and add that or back sweeten it. There's so many, but if you like a good natural wine, but I will say, different wines have different ages. So like a grape wine, the older it gets, the better, up to a certain point, 20, 30 years, whatever, down the road. Some of this 100, 200 year stuff, probably not that great. But maybe it is. I don't know. I've never tried it. But a lot of fruits aren't like that. A lot of fruits don't necessarily get better over long periods of time. In fact, most fruits don't. Some fruits, fruit wines, they recommend you drink them within a year or two, because the flavor starts degrading. They just don't hold the flavor and improve in flavor like some grapes do. And there's other wines that will be okay with longer periods of time, but a lot of your fruits, they don't do real well over long periods of time, and watermelon may be one of those. I'm thinking. Yeah, Jimmy, you can. Good point. You can do. When it comes down to it, you can also make your wine, and if you want to get a little higher proof out of it, you can put it in the freezer or put it outside during the wintertime when it gets down to about 0, and just go out there from time to time and pull the ice out of it, and that'll increase the proof. Yeah, you can do that, and you can also, like the watermelon juice that comes off the watermelon. You can kind of boil that off and treat it like you would a maple syrup. And kind of just boil a lot of the water off and concentrate it. Yeah, that works real well. Yeah. Jewish moonshine. You're gonna have to. I'm googling now. I don't know everything. Everybody says, "Oh, you Google everything." No, I don't. I Google what I don't know, and when somebody asks me about certain things like that, I don't know, and I don't care to admit it. A lot of people, they'd never do a Q&A like this because they're so afraid of not being able to answer a question. And there's nothing wrong with that. Jewish moonshine, yes. Made spirit, Eastern Europe. Probably, I was thinking like a grappa maybe, but potatoes, barley, prunes, or local berries. So it's either a vodka, a grain, or a fruit. So that's pretty wide open. So you can use just about anything almost to make a Jewish shine. Yash. Y-A-S-H. Probably the Y might even be silent. I don't know how to speak that language. Yeah, I'd say it's based on what you could get, kind of like us moonshiners do. If you certain times of year, taters, pretty cheap, it makes potatoes shine. Certain times of year, those prunes or plums are coming in, and time to make some plum slivovitch. Berries, brandy, and barley. It's kind of a single grain barley. So yeah, they looks like they did quite a few different quite a few different ones to make that. Freeze distillation. That's when, you know, you take a wine and put it out in, you know, cold weather, 0 or less. It's got to be pretty cold. You know, once you're, you know, your freezing point of your water will lower as you put alcohol in, because alcohol is kind of like an antifreeze. So you have to get, you know, less than 32 considerably. But you set it out in a bucket, and the weather, or if you have a freezer that goes to sub-zero, or, you know, minus something, preferably, you can freeze it in a freezer and just pull ice. You know, as the ice formulates in there, you pull it out. Just scoop it out of there, because it's just water. Because the alcohol won't form an ice. Just the water will separate from the alcohol and the ice over. So that's how they make Applejack. It makes headsy stuff though, so no, it makes very headsy liquor. So it's definitely something, if you get drunk on, you're gonna have a headache. You're gonna have a bad hangover. Because Applejack makes for a pretty bad hangover. Just keep that in mind. Yeah, you know, the HDPE barrels, you know, once you get them pretty clean, you know, you can spray them out if you want to. You know, if you're worried about it, you can get you a 3M pad, or, you know, scrubby pad. Little I like 3M pads with little handles on it. Some of them have like a, you know, mop handle where you get down in there if it's deep, you know, where you can't reach. 15-gallon though shouldn't be too big. Yeah, just clean them out, scrub them out real good with a little Dawn, and then follow up with a, you know, dump some hot water in there or something, some boiling water into it, and slosh it around, and, you know, good high temp water, kill about everything in there. So that would be pretty good. Now, you know, Clint was talking earlier about some of these old olive barrels and pickle barrels. You know, the big black ones. You know, they tend to be a little bit harder to clean. Get that pickle, you know, juice, that sour pickle note in the olive. I guess probably has some oils in there to deal with, but they make good barrels. But if you get one, just, you know, make your first shine or two a pickle shine. You know, just add some pickles and go with it. You know. Yeah, I'm the same way. Yeah, yeah, I think that's what they were asking about earlier, um, about him pouring that puree in there, that concentrated puree. I used to use bleach a lot, man, but I don't use it anymore. It seems like for me it takes a lot to rinse it and get it all out of there. I just use the Star Sand and 3M pads and the old scrub, and, you know, the and hot water if I need to kill off anything, and Star Sand. So if you do a 5-gallon mash, how much wine? Well, once you take the cap off, whatever's left is, other than, you know, the sediments in the bottom, will be your wine. So basically, with winemaking, if you're using fruits, they call it a must, M-U-S-T, like I must drink it. Generally, with grains, they call it a mash, and then like with sugars and like the agave syrups and a lot of those, they call those washes. So, but with a lot of the must, what you'll do is you'll after you do a primary fermentation, like with wines, what you'll do is a primary and a secondary fermentation. So you do the primary fermentation just like you would for regular brandy or anything else, like you're getting ready to distill it, right? But instead of you skim off all the pulp, off all the, depending on what it is, some like grapes and stuff, you might want to take the peels off there, the skins right off the bat, so it doesn't give you any bitter flavors. Um, so you'll remove those right off the bat after your pectic enzyme eats all the meat out of it. There'll just be little skins left, and you can scoop those out, and then put it in another vessel called, you'll rack it. So once it gets clear, you can just siphon it off into another fermentation vessel and let it sit in those. I like using those 5-gallon water jugs that you get, the big, huge commercial ones that you buy the water in that you turn upside down in the office, coolers and stuff. I like those. And you get a number 10 stopper. Number 10 will fit in the top one hole, and you can use an airlock in that. And I just, and you can see they're clear, so you can see where your tube is that you're siphoning, and you'll have a yeast bed in the bottom. It's just dead yeast and flocculants and a lot of grains, fruit pulp, whatever you're doing in the very bottom. And then you just get your tube down close to that and rack it off. So you rack everything out of that primary vessel into a secondary vessel. And then you'll put an airlock on that, and then you'll let it sit, for a longer period of time and let it go for a while in secondary fermentation. And you'll have some sediments in that, and then you rack it off again if you want to. If you get quite a bit more, fermentation going on, in secondary, you can rack it off again into a third, and you won't have a lot of sediments left after that. So you let that sit for 3 or 4 months and do its thing. There's a lot of chemical processes going on we talk about. So once you do that, you can put it in a jar and start drinking it, depending on the wine. Now, some wines, like grapes, probably best to let it go a year, sometimes 2, before you start drinking on them. Whereas, like apple wine or a peach wine, or I haven't done a lot of watermelon wines. I've done them, but peach wine and apple wine probably, and plum wine I do a lot of, blackberry wine, cherry wines, maybe 6-8 months, and they're drinkable. If you want a back sweetening, you can go 2 routes. You can put some potassium sorbate into the must, and that's during secondary fermentation, right? And that's pretty much at the end when you're getting ready to bottle it up. You can put potassium sorbate in there, and basically that'll take whatever yeast is still alive and viable in there, and it'll make it to where they can't reproduce, right? So they'll just die of old age, die off, and you won't have any more active yeast going. And that allows you to back sweeten it a little bit. Because if you try to add a little sweetener in there and there's still yeast, it will just eat the sweetener up. So you got to either kill them off or neuter them. And a lot of people like the flavor of potassium sorbate a little better than potassium metabisulfate, which kills the yeast. It'll kill them off. Also has a little bit, the sulfate in there adds a little bit of a flavor that some people don't care for the wine, but if you dose it right, you're going to get lost. And you can degas it, depending on the wine. So there's a lot of processes going on to make a wine, but man, they are good. But anyway, if you put that in there, you can back sweeten a little bit and not have to worry about the fermentation starting back up again. Or you can use this xylitol. Now, I know a lot of people don't like xylitol. I mentioned a lot of people, and they're, oh, it gives me the shits and all this. Okay. But it works well to sweeten with because the yeast don't consume it. It's not fermentable. It's alcohol sugar. And it's been used in a lot of food industries these days. But you can back sweeten with that without having to add either, and get a little bit of a sweeter wine out of it. But winemaking's fun. Oh yeah, that's nice, brother. Yeah, that's real nice. Now, does that have a pressure relief or anything in the top of it? Or if not, I'd probably mount me a little valve right in the very top. Well, in your cap, you know, you can put it right in that cap. Okay, and open it up. Or I guess you, with that the way it is, you can just take off the cap and loosen the cap and prop it up a little bit and let it vent out that way. But it's so easy just opening up that vent, just walking away till it cools, you know, opening up that valve. I like having that valve on mine. But you got to remember to do it. Yeah, meads. You know, like, well, you know, some of the grape wines, you know, you can, those last a long time. And the meads, yeah, those last a while. But if you start with a 5-gallon mash, and you're talking about just wine and not shine, you probably get you know, I guess a gallon of it's going to be probably displaced by the, you know, the fruit pulp and all the other stuff. So, you know, you're probably going to get 4+ gallons of wine out of it. You'll know once you go into secondary fermentation, because most of that will become the wine. Just whatever sediments in the bottom is what doesn't become the wine. So it's pretty efficient. You know, I try everything I ferment, man. I'll taste it. All right, now gravity is basically it's measuring the sugar content. So as a liquid becomes more sugary, it becomes more syrupy, and it becomes thicker. So your hydrometer doesn't sink down into it very far because it's so dense and viscous. So it floats higher, and the higher it floats, the higher the sugar content. So, you know, until I guess it just gets the thick, it'll just sit right on the top, and like honey, it'll take it a while just to drop down into it, right? So as you know, as it's calibrated for water sugar combinations. You know, there's other stuff in there that will influence it slightly. A little pulp in there gets in the way a little bit. Time will affect your reading a little bit. Best to have, you know, as clean a liquid from your mash as you can. Try not to get grains and a lot of pulp and stuff in there when you're measuring it. And you want to measure it around 60, 70 degrees, close to room temperature. That's what they're calibrated for. But there's conversion charts, you know, that'll you know show how much difference is based on temperature. So a little warmer, of course, going to be, you know, it's going to go a little deeper in a warmer versus a cold syrup. You know, you can imagine it being thicker and showing. So the warmer it is, the higher it tends to show it and gives you a little false rating that it's actually a little higher than it is. Or I'm sorry, lower than it is because it doesn't sink as much. But it's basically the more sugar you have in the water, the thicker it becomes. So your hydrometer floats higher in it. So it measures it. It's scaled. There's a scale. That 0 is just pure water, basically, right? No sugars left. And this is not necessarily fermentable sugars. This is just sugars, right? So, and it's called gravity. Kind of like you know, when you're doing a battery test, you know, you use the hydrometer for that. It's the same principle. It's just, you know, gauged differently for a different liquid, measuring a different liquid. There you're measuring acid in water instead of sugar in water. So, you know, it's calibrated for water acid for your battery reading, where this is, you know, calibrated for sugar in water. So it'll tell you how much sugar that you've gotten, and it'll give you, you know, what a potential, how much potential alcohol you're going to have. For example, it starts at 1.0 and goes, and 1.000 is like water. 1.010 and, you know, on up, like 1.080 is basically about 10%. So that's about, you don't want to get a whole lot above that. 1090 for certain rums, maybe 2 if you're getting crazy, you know, and you're going to do like a vodka, and you're going to just do a neutral and you're going to clean it up. But, you know, 1060, 70, 80 range will give you, you know, 8%, 10% alcohol. And that tells you that, you know, if everything converts well, all the sugars that it's reading in there convert and the yeast can eat them all, then you should expect to get 10% of it alcohol, or 20 proof in your mash, 10%. So that means that if you've got 5 gallons, 10% of that 5 gallons is going to be alcohol. Can you recover all of it? No, you know, you can't. You can't get it all, but you can get as much as you can, and that's, you know, but you're not going to get the full amount. You know, like if it's a 10-gallon run and it's 10%, that means you got a 1 gallon of 200 proof ethanol in there, right? So, but if it's coming off at 120, of course you're going to get more, right? Because there's, you know, it's mixing with water and other things from the mash as you distill them. So, but that's basically what it tells you is what you can expect. You know, how much alcohol you can expect if everything gets fermented, and how much sugars you're starting with, and you want to start with, you know, a certain range of sugars so it's efficient. So, you know, sometimes people do these conversions, they don't do them right at all. They denature the enzymes, or the enzymes don't work. They go in at the wrong temp, or too low a temp, or that they're old, they're not effective, they're the powder, it doesn't work well unless you get it in a very fine range. There's 1,000 things that can cause it to go bad or wrong, and they don't get a good conversion. Then that hydrometer is still going to tell them you got all these sugars, but they're not fermentable sugars, so you're not going to get all that 10%. So sometimes that happens when you run like in rums with brown sugars and molasses and blackstrap and things like that, that all the sugars in there aren't fermentables. You know, you get saccharides, polysaccharides, and things in there, oligosaccharides in there that aren't fermentable, and dextrins in there that aren't fermentable. So you're not going to get that full 10% potential. But the hydrometer is essential, and it helps you, like if you're making a brandy and you just don't know how much sugar is in the fruit you're using, because a lot of people, the first time they do like a strawberry, you know, they'll be like, oh, I can't wait to do this strawberry run. They'll mash up a bunch of strawberries, put it in the water, and they'll, you know, mash up pound after pound after pound and put it in the, you know, that little bit of water and get the juice out of it, puree it down, and drop that hydrometer in there, and it goes like 1.010. It's like, what? there's like no sugar in those things. You know, they're very, very low sugar. So that's why, you know, we use these charts that give us a little heads up. I'll pull one up for you here, and if you can screenshot, that's good. If you can't, it's on file at the Moonshine Militia in the file section at the top of the page, and also in the DIY Shine and Stuff page in the file section. Let me find these. Just 1 second here. Interesting. Yeah, usually I have this stuff Here we go. So this chart here will show you, you know, look at strawberries down here, 5.8. It's got less sugar than a grapefruit, bro. You know, it's so surprising. The first time I ever did strawberries, I was like, wow. You know, and I hadn't looked at these charts or anything. I just used my hydrometer, you know, and I pureed them all up and got everything going and got them strained and everything. And it was like, is there hardly any sugar in there at all? I'm like, you kidding me, man? So that takes a lot of sugar, which is why people say, oh, that strawberry makes it hot shine. Well, it makes hot shine because you have to use so much fucking sugar with it. That's why. So a lot of these fruits here you see on the bottom, people say, oh, it makes pretty hot shine. It's because you have to add a lot of sugars to them. They don't have a lot of natural sugars in them to get your gravity up to a reasonable point to where, you know, you can get a decent amount of alcohol. Now, if you're just making a wine, it's a lot less critical. Because you don't really want 10, 12%, you know, wine, some 6-8% alcohol wines. So you don't necessarily want a real strong alcohol wine. Some people do. But if you want to make a fine wine, you know, you don't want to get real high proof. But yeah, so a lot of you can use your hydrometer to tell you how much sugar you're going to have to add to all this fruit, right? Or in that grain conversion, like if you do a grain conversion, you know, drop that hydrometer in there, it'll tell you how well your conversion happened. You know, you can use your iodine to test for starch. Did I get all the starches out? You know, did I get all the starches converted? But it doesn't tell you, you know, how much sugars you have. So that you drop that hydrometer in there and it'll tell you how much sugars you have. Now, the old timers will be able to just dip their finger in and taste it, and, you know, used to doing the same, you know, recipe over and over and over and over. So they just dip their finger in their taste and say, yeah, that's good, it's ready to go. But if you want to get consistent, you want to get good, consistent results, you know, the more scientific you go with it, you know, as far as temperature, times, and things like that, and using your hydrometers definitely will help. Yeah, I just don't try to read into any of that. Yeah, now pears, you know, again, surprisingly high, but there's a range on pears because, you know, if you get some of these pears that are really hard and a little immature, you're not going to have as much sugar in there. So these numbers will vary depending on how ripe the fruit is, and, you know, underripe is going to be less, overripe is going to be more. So this is probably just a good average. But I do like this chart because it also adds some vegetables on here to kind of let you compare what you can get as some vegetables and dried fruits. This is interesting here because, you know, a lot of people like dehydrating it to concentrate flavors. We were talking about earlier how, you know, making wines, how you can, you know, boil the water off to, like you would a maple syrup, to concentrate sugars and flavor. You can also do that by dehydrating it and taking all the water out of it and mashing in with that, because you can kind of concentrate your flavors that way as well. See? Yeah, pear wine's good. What's going on, Scott? What's up, Mikey? Wish that intro didn't say with Alan Bishop. Did it say that? Did I use my whole name? Does it say that? What intro? You got me confused, bro. All right, let me look at what I posted. What are you talking about, Mikey? You're confusing me now. What intro? Talk to me, Mikey. Yeah, the blue ones work real well. The black ones, I mean, they all have their purpose. The black ones work well, like in the wintertime when it gets cold, and they can kind of self-regulate their heat by, just the sun shining on that black keeps them warm. So, it just depends. But they can definitely get too hot easily in the summer. What's going on, Big Cat? Absolutely, Bill. Big Cat, I'd recommend getting the football. It's let's see, I think I got a picture of it I saved last time. I think I kept a picture of that somewhere. Let's see here. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about with the football steels? I'm pretty sure. Oh, damn. Look at all these pictures here. Probably easier for me to just go grab one off Amazon. Hold on just a second. I'll grab you one, Big Cat. Because there's a certain type on Amazon. They call it football steel. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them. But they've got a ferrule on the top. That or a beer keg, was definitely the way to go. But if you want to get everything that without having to do any work, the Weber's good. If you want to get a keg and have somebody weld some ferrules in it, not essential. I mean, you can use a keg without it. I did for a long time. But let me see. Okay, let me grab that. Picture. Let's see, let me take it screenshots. Let's see. Okay. Let me add that picture. Here we go. That's what we call a Weber's football. And of course, the head shape, that's why it gets its name, the football steel. But it's a great starter steel. 13, 15, 18 and a half gallon. They used to have a 20, I think, but they don't do it anymore. They have a little bit bigger one than 18 and a half at one time in the old days. But that's the basic setup. It's got a little pump in there to circulate water through your condenser. Comes with your line, about everything you need to get started. Got your little silicone plastic graduated cylinder and a little hydrometer in there to measure proof. Now this isn't going to do that like the triple scale hydrometer. I should have mentioned that earlier to Greg. The one that's measuring your mash is called a triple scale hydrometer. And then you also have another type of hydrometer that measures proof. So I was talking about the one how it's calibrated for water and sugar. The proof, the alkalometer, is calibrated for alcohol and water. So but basically the concentration ratios of each will influence how it floats, right? The more alcohol, the thinner the body, the deeper it sinks, the higher the proof it shows on the chart, and vice versa. The more water, the higher it floats, and the lower the proof that it shows. So, but this football steel is pretty good. Excellent starting. I think people that start with like a 13, 15, or an 18.5 of these, especially the 18.5, they tend to go longer without needing an upgrade than if somebody buys like the 5-gallon or 8-gallon 3-pot. They tend to, you know, have them for 6, 8 months, a year, maybe a year and a half, and then they're looking to upgrade because it just, you know, it's easier when you make a mash. It's not twice as hard to make 10 gallons versus 5, right? It doesn't take much more time to make 10 gallons of mash versus 5. It doesn't take twice as long, right? It doesn't take hardly any longer, really. You know, you had to add a little bit more corn, a little bit more water, boil it a little bit longer, but you know, we're only talking minutes versus having to do the whole process, get everything out, doing everything. So a lot of people try to mash in a lot more than they run each time because it will keep. It's a wine or a beer, and you know, under certain temperatures and conditions, you know, you keep for quite some time. So you know, make a bigger mash and just run it as you can, and just siphon off what you want to run, and then put your airlock or lid back on it, and you know, easily so you don't build pressure, but and you can just keep going in there and scooping some out every time you want to run some, you know, and so you can do like a 50-pound bag of corn and 20, 25 gallons of water. If you got a 5-gallon still, then that'll make you, you know, well, you have to run 4 gallons at a time because you can't run the full amount, right? It pukes over. So you have to, you know, if it's 18.5 gallon steel, that means it's 18.5 gallons to the rim where it's going to leak. So, you know, you're going to run, you know, 17, 16.5, 17. You want to leave a gap there for the foam and stuff to foam up because it will. You can't even boil water without it foaming. So, you know, you're going to get some foamage cooking a beer for sure. And some of those white wines, they get real foamy too, like champagnes, you know. So, degassing those a little bit doesn't hurt either before you run them. But that's a pretty good starter still. But a keg, you know, a keg, 15-gallon, 35, 40 bucks. We were just talking about that. Hard to beat. You know, you can go electric with it. You know, get some ferrules welded into the side. You can weld you a bigger ferrule on the top side for a big clean out, and you know, kind of modify you a good keg. Kegs are thicker, heavier duty stainless than those Devers. Those Devers are basically just like a cook stove pot that you cook on the stove. So once you start getting a decent little column on it, they don't want to support it as well as what a keg will too. So both I'd say a keg or that football steel, you can't go wrong with those. 3-pot, you can get them a little bit cheaper, but you immediately have to start working on the gaskets, increasing the size of the lines, doing the condenser, fixing the condenser because it's always grossly undersized, and you know those. Yeah, 13 gallons is decent size. You know, it's just 5. If you get a 5-gallon or an 8-gallon, you know, it's a lot of work. You know, 13, 15, 18, you know, then you're getting some pretty decent, you know, you're getting some pretty decent amount of product out of it. You know, a little bit more worth your while than, you know, a 5-gallon steel that's running 3.5 gallons in. 3.5 gallons, you know, you might get maybe quart. You're not going to get a lot, so it's a lot of work for just a little bit of return. So bigger the better, less often you have to do it, and easier to make cuts on. Yeah, I always, you know, the keg or the bever, either one, you know, for beginners, it works fine. If you get your gaskets and everything in there, just find the top seated. This one doesn't have the gasket issues that the 3-pots do, but I've seen people not understand how to put the rubber silicone gasket into the lid itself. A lot of people think it's just supposed to sit on the top and mesh it down. I've seen people cut it and do a lot of different things, and they didn't read the instructions because sometimes it doesn't come with instructions. But There's groups that are made just for bevers. That's all they talk about is the bevers and fibbling them. They've got tons of videos on bevers and how to upgrade them. They've got a lot of parts and stuff for them. So any improvements you want to make on them, you can hit them up, man. They got about everything. I'm getting way behind. Yeah, I was talking about the cheap beverage. It's just a lot of work when you get it. Yeah, definitely go check out our buddies at Still in the Clear. Cyrus over there, he's a good guy, very knowledgeable guy. I like Cyrus. I've not met him yet. Looking forward to meeting him. He and I are admin in a lot of different groups together, but he does a lot of off the grid stuff. I dig it, man. I like him. Like listening to his stuff. So definitely check him out. Yeah, you can start out with the football. The football, you can pack it with, you don't have to use it like the rectification, like they tell you, instructions how to use the rectification and all that. You don't have to do that. Just use it like a whiskey head, and you can put your copper mesh in there where, it's got like a ferrule in the side, and you can just stuff your copper in through that. They come with ceramic balls, not really balls, but ceramic tubes for um, reflux, but just put your copper in that football and it works. The footballs work very well, but that and the keg, both of those you can get them going pretty well. The 18.5 gallon football steels run about 220. A keg is about 35. If you want to have a ferrule added to the top for a clean out, um, probably going to cost anywhere from 60 to 100 plus, to get somebody to weld that in, take that in for you, unless you know somebody. So it's, you can spend a little bit of money investing in your keg and get that clean out put in there. Have a couple of 2-inch into the sides, bottom, not just the side, middle, lower, so you can run some elements in there and do all electric. But yeah, I'm getting behind. So yeah, if I was going to buy a bever, it'd definitely have to be the football. Um, Again, the others work fine, but they just require modification and work. And if you don't want to put the time in to fix some of the little quirks that they have, but there's thousands of them out there, man. People make perfectly good shine out of it. It just requires a little bit of work. Yeah, that's it. They'll keep for a long time. Yeah. Yeah, I get behind at times. I want to answer everybody's questions, but sometimes I get a little bit behind. So Clint and them try to help me out a lot about keeping up with those. While I'm trying to answer one person's questions, they'll try to help you answer yours. And 2 years, that's awesome. I've heard people, going a year easy. Yep, definitely. Especially, like if you get a stuck fermentation like the guy that was earlier at 1.22, if you want to add some glucose, it's not too late. If you want to throw a little bit of glucose in there and try to break up and debranch anything that's left, You know, absolutely. Because a lot of times, if it's not the temperature, your temperature's good, your pH is good, you know, your yeast is viable and it's still good, throw in some glucose. Yeah, got to keep those acetobacters out. That's the, especially like in wines that you're going to age and go for a long time. You know, for making a brandy, it's not as critical unless you're going to really age it properly to make a wine and then a brandy. Most people make a lazy brandy. They just, you know, just convert it and do the primary fermentation. There's no secondary. They go primary into the boiler, which is unfortunately how most brandy's made. So they don't get to mature as a wine before they're made into a brandy, and you can definitely taste the difference. But there's a big, huge cost difference too, and time and ability. You know, it's. I made my grappa that way. You know, I let it age like a year and 4 or 5 months, and then I distilled it and let it jar age for another, you know, 6, 8 months. So it took 2 years to make it, but it's the best fucking shit you ever drank, you know. But it takes a long time to do, you know. It takes a long, long time. You have to have a lot of patience, and it, you know, if you were trying to do that to make a living, you know, that'd be a 200 bottle jar, you know, $200 a bottle. That, you know, that's a top shelf thing, and you know, it's hard to do that unless you get into a market a niche. But it's definitely high quality and really good, the best. But it's just, you know, most people don't. You can't really do that as a. Depends on your business model, you know. And if you're doing it for yourself, if you have wines that have matured and you know, reaching, maybe getting a little past maturity, you know, if you have enough of them, you can run those, and those make damn good brandies, damn good brandies. And I've had a lot of people that'll have a bunch of different wines and they'll just mix them all up and run them. They make the best fucking brandy they've ever drank, and they're like, I can't remember how many of which and what I put in there. I'd love to be able to do that again, you know. Then they try to replicate it. So, but yeah, keg or a favorite football. Yeah, yeah. As long, well, you don't want to keep it completely sealed. What you do is you keep it sealed when you use an airlock. So if you're going to be long term, I highly recommend using airlocks. If you're going to just be a quick, you know, 3 or 4 days like a grain mash and done, or you're just going to, you know, do it quick and be done with it, not as essential. But if you're going to make wines and long term fermentation, yeah, you need airlocks. Don't let anybody kid you. They're fruit flies. Fruit tends to have an acid. It's acetobacter. It's a bacteria. Uh, Acetobacillus or something. You know, it's a bacteria that forms in decomposing fruits, and it creates mother of vinegar. You know, as acetic acid. So it forms. So these fruit flies, when they crawl over these rotting fruits, they get that acetobacters on their body, and then when they fly into your, you know, mash and dye, all that goes into the mash. Now, if you're a huge winery with 1,000-gallon vat, that one little fly is not going to really do shit. But you know, if you've got like a 5-gallon, you know, fermenter, and you get a few bunch of those flies in there, and you'll look once you get an airlock in there, and you see all the flies that are dead in it. As a matter of fact, hold on, I'll get one. I'll show you. You see all those little, you know, kind of hard to see. Yeah, there you go. That's fruit flies. You don't want them getting in your mash. Those get into your mash, and over time, now it doesn't happen quick, which is why you know, with your grains and stuff, it's not as essential because you're going to be probably fermenting it pretty quickly. But anytime it's going to take a lot of time, I don't care what it is, it's good to have those because the over time they build up and they keep feeding and building and feeding and building. And eventually you'll get mother of bacteria created. You know, it's one of the ways that you can actually make mother mother of vinegar, mother of bacteria, mother of vinegar. So, and you know, and your wine can turn to vinegar. Now, keeping, you know, the in your fermenter, you know, once you do secondary fermentation, you're not going to have a lot of foaming and yeast action going on. So you can take that liquid to the top, and that's why all these carboys and stuff and fermenters you see have a really small top, just like those water jugs I was talking about. That's what I just pulled that cap out of. That's a number 10 cap, right? That was in one of those 5-gallon water jugs. And you can take those all the way up to the curve, you know, right there, and you can limit the amount of oxygen space that is in that. And once you put that cap on there, carbon dioxide fills that void, and you don't have a lot of space for air to gather to encourage bacterial growth. So, and the acidity levels are low to discourage bacterial growth. So everything's, and the alcohol level in there is at such level that it inhibits bacterial growth. So everything you do like that is you definitely want to keep it as clean as possible, and these bacteria out that you can. And I'm scrolling down here. English plum tree. Now, plums make really good wine and really good shine. Some of the best. They really do. I love plum wine. I've got cases of it in there. And I've made what's called Slivovich. It's a moonshine made from plums. It's a good flavored shine. Yeah, I've got one run of cherries. It's probably been 3 years ago, and I need to drink that wine because cherries is one of those that doesn't do like grapes. It's about 3 or 4 years, and that's about what these are. So I need to drink it. But oh my God, around the year after the first year, it was so good. I took it to our Christmas party, family party, and everybody dug it. They thought it was one of the best wines I've made, and it was really good. But cherries get so damn expensive, man. It's hard for me to do them. I have to wait for them to get cheap, and they haven't been cheap in the last few years. I can get 99 cents a pound or cheaper before I pull the trigger on them, and that doesn't happen often when you get them that cheap. But they make damn good wine and brandy. Especially get a little back sweetening in there and get them. I don't like them really bitter. I think it's not medicine-y like a lot of the cherry shine tends to be. Welcome back. Not a whole lot, brother. Not a whole lot. We've been talking about using airlocks and winemaking and the time it takes to make good wines and how different fruits mature as far as the wine goes. And yeah, I love me some tequila too. Yeah, I talked about the beverage stills and the football stills. What's your hydrometer read? What I do is just open up your cap, move past that, and dip a cup in there and pour it, get your graduated cylinder. And I always take my hydrometer reading outside. I don't, unless the cap's totally dropping, it's perfectly clear on the top, then I'll just set it on top. But if you have a cap, excuse me, push it all to the side, strain out some clears, and put them in a hydrometer, a jar big enough, and take your measurements in there, or a graduated cylinder or a jar, and put your hydrometer in that. Get things on my mind while I'm talking. Was that your Spanish fly? I've had caps that never dropped. I've had caps that just stay, especially like with brandies and odd fruits and stuff. But I've had some caps that just held on. It was perfectly dry, underneath, and then the cap still just floating right up there. So sometimes I'll push it to the side and strain off and measure it just to make sure. But yeah, I've had caps sit there and it be 0.998, and dry as fuck. It's ready to go. So I've had to skim a few off. That's funny as hell. That's cracking me up. That highlight that. Induction. How well is that working? I know they say, I guess, that it's working okay. Do you get pretty good heat transfer with it? Boil some water and let us know, because I've had mixed. I've not tried it, but some people said it didn't work as well, and some people said it works just fine. So I don't know. I would say that the 304 that works better than the 404 with induction. The 300 series stainless work a little bit better than the 400 series. I think the 400 series has more nickel and less steel in it. So I think the 300 series probably be a little bit better. Okay. Yeah, I open ferment like grains. Well, technically it's not open fermenting. I put a towel and then the lid to the barrel over top of that. So, I've got like a big towel laying over it and then the lid over that and kind of snug down. Air can escape, but bugs ain't getting in, right? So that's not technically open fermenting, but it's not like using an airlock with, perfectly sealed. Because with my grains, you know, 4, 5, 6 days, it's done, it's ready. Most of my brandies, that I'm not going to take full length and mature the wine and go all that length, like I was talking about. If I just want a quick brandy, I won't worry about it with that either. But if I'm making a wine, absolutely gets airlocked every time. But I'll do the primary. That's like, especially for the ones that work out pretty quickly, like strawberries with a lot of sugar and not a lot of anything. They work out pretty quickly because there's a lot of sugar. So those I don't worry about as much either. Yep. Yeah, you can flip your kegs over and use the bottom as a drain, and you can, you can ferment in a keg, just fine. And at the bottom where the tri clamp is, like Clint's talking about, you can put your little butterfly valve on there, or a gate valve, and open it up and let all your flocculants and stuff out, and kind of clean it up, and get a lot of that out without having to siphon into the secondary like I was talking about. Well, burn Philbilly's page up and come here and ask you questions. We'll get you going, brother. Yeah, I think they carry it. It's just flat on one side and grooved on the other. So yeah, Philbilly carries those. How's it going, Ivan? Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting him. He seems like a real good guy. We've just not crossed paths at any of the festivals and stuff. I guess he's busy. I was down there in Arkansas. I didn't run into him down there at the festival down there. But yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting him and see he's pretty chill. I love that off the grid stuff too. Sometimes. What about the football ever? Uh oh. What you misspeak about? They like the streams too. We're here every Saturday and Wednesday, Greg. Stop, you know. I usually go to about 8 to 11, 8 to 10, 8 to 11, depending on how many questions we're getting, how active it is. We've been pretty good and active tonight. Had a few in here asking some questions, so it's always good. Yeah, Jeff, I remembered somebody was talking about selling that. If somebody's, wanting a good setup, right there it is. What? You're in North Carolina, right, Jeff? What's going on, Crayons? I'm a little behind, brother. I'm sorry. Not too bad. 15 minutes. I'm getting bad though. Yeah, vinegar bugs are a real thing. It's just the cetobacteria though they carry it on their legs like bees do pollen. It's just all over. It gets all over everything once it gets in contact. Just the bacteria. But yeah, I mean, you can make some. A lot of people throw it away, but it makes a good cooking wine. Vinegar. I've had some turned out pretty tasty, but they were wines. It wasn't like a grain mash or something. Yep. Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, if you put like heads in there, it might attract them, but it'll definitely kill them. So I'm gonna kind of scroll fast. Yeah, I like the sound of using some kind of mineral oil or vegetable oil that's food grade. Mine, I just have to go in there and top them off every few weeks. It's no big deal. It's in the laundry room, so when I go in there to do laundry and stuff, or get a bottle of wine, I can check them out and top them off. I keep a little bottled water right next to it, so it's no big deal. There we go. Did you answer that already, Clint? If you can keep the lacto from building up in there and keep things hot to and killed off and replenish it with grains, a certain percentage, you can go, just keep going forever and ever and ever. As long as you take out grains and add fresh grains, 10% every time or something like that, you go forever. Yeah, that's a good point, brother. Damn good point. Yeah, and Scott, if you take out, a lot of people say fifth, sixth generation is a point where it just starts tasting like sugar sour because you're really not getting any grain flavor. So if you take out 10% and add 10% every time, um, you can go forever and ever and ever. You know, just keep going each time. So, whatever you scoop out, measure it, cook it, throw it back in there, and just have to boil some corn down. You don't have to. Well, I mean, you can throw some amylase on it if you want to, and let it cool and throw it in there, convert it. But I mean, it's something you can do on your stovetop instead of out on a turkey fryer outside in the heat with a big old huge amount. We're talking maybe a couple pounds of corn, in a few quarts of water, cooked down. So it's really, you know, not that bad. Yeah, watch your pH. Keep you some of those crushed oyster shells in there, and that'll help regulate your pH. And when you add your back set in, it'll help regulate that. And just replenish, a certain percentage of your grains. You may find 10% is a little more than needed. 5%, might be a little shy, so somewhere in between maybe. But just whatever you scoop out, add that back in, and do that every time, and it'll maintain some consistent. You'll get consistent with it. I'm not sure about if you're talking about the football steel gaskets. I don't know if you one of the big ones for the lid, but if you find an 18 and a half, let me know. What's going on, Chris? Right? Yeah, Scott. I'm sorry. No, no, I wasn't. I wasn't. I was just saying that you can use the football, or hell, I've seen people use that football in a lot of crazy ways. No, you don't have to use a football. You can use a little. You can use a column, or you can go directly with a pipe to the condenser. I do that with my brandies and whiskeys. To be honest with you, brother. Yeah, if you can keep your pH in the fours, it's fine. 4.5, 5, perfect. Fours, even high threes. Yeah, when you throw that back set in there, it'll work on eggshells or eggshells, oyster shells and coral, and it'll release calcium into it, and that's essential for fermentation anyway. So the yeast love it. So it helps in more ways than one. It helps keep your calcium up, like using limestone water. That's one of the reasons the limestone water is good, because of the calcium. Yeah, when you start out 5.2, 5.3 is perfect, but when you're doing a sour mash, you're going to be in the fours. You're going to stay in the fours, and that's fine. Because the yeast that you're using is definitely going to be able to handle the fours. Most all the yeast handles fours just fine. So if you can, if you can balance it, keep it in the, in the fours the whole time, you'll be just fine. But that's how you can kind of, if it gets too acidic, don't add as much back set the next time. Don't put as much of your back set in there. Just add a little bit less and a little bit more water, and bring the pH up. With the water and sugar that you're adding, and just use less back set. You can regulate it that way. But yeah, if you can just keep adding X%, and it's always somewhere between 5 and 10, probably 8. But I mean, how are you going to figure 8% of what you got there? Just eyeball it and just take, just a section out and say, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then I can kind of figure 8 out of that, and just pull a handful out and replace it with about the same amount, and it'll get pretty consistent once you take out the same every time. And if it's like a cracked corn, yeah. Aluminum pressure cooker. Appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in. A lot of people used aluminum back in the days, and I've started out with a pressure cooker, aluminum, Luminox. And we didn't know then what we do today. Some of the aluminum ions can come off, and it's a big argument these days, back and forth. We've got scientists and doctors and everybody arguing back and forth, but the general consensus is it's perfectly fine for boiling your water and cooking your grains. But once we, like the back set, we were just talking about how it gets kind of acidic. Once you start getting, a low pH with that aluminum, um, some of the ions start coming off. They started noticing it back in the day when they would cook a lot of acidic, like tomatoes and other stuff like that. They cooked those down, and anything heavily acidic, they started noticing that it would start pitting earlier than, if they just used it for other things. So, but that's, whether it causes Alzheimer's and affects your memory and all that, that's a huge scientific debate. But I would say I tend to be err on the caution side of caution. Stainless is so cheap these days. I mean, I'm not going to say you can't do it, whether you should or not. I used to, and I'm starting to get forgetful. So maybe that's a pretty good indicator that you might not want to, because I'm starting to forget every fucking thing. So, yeah, there's a lot of cheap steels out there, in the keg, like we've been talking about the whole time. I highly just save your aluminum pressure cooker for canning and pressure canning and boiling water. It's great for that. And cooking your mash, it's great for cooking your mash in. But when it comes to fermenting, use a big barrel or something like that. It's fine. Or that would probably be okay-ish, but they still tend to get acidic. So maybe I wouldn't even ferment one. But get you a keg. They're cheap, and they work real well. And it's easy to get you a ferrule, 2-inch ferrule, and they've got the 2-inch ferrules that have like a threaded cap on the top of the ferrule, so you just put it right on the beer on the keg, and it's got a threaded, on there, so you can just put any kind of threaded pipe or You know, threaded copper. If you wanted to solder some copper, you could do that route, or you know, compression fittings or whatever you wanted to coming out of something like that. If you didn't want to go, you know, with sanitary ferrules the whole way. Let me get a picture of that, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. I like using pictures because it's kind of hard sometimes to describe, and when you show somebody a picture, they're like, "Oh, I see what you're talking about." I should have one in my Amazon wish list. I keep things that I use in there and that I recommend in there. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now this is like a 3/4 to 2-inch fittings, and they do make different sizes. Let me carry that over for you. All right. Now let me add that. Looks like that. So this will fit right on top of the keg, and like we were talking about a minute ago, there's a flat side that on the right underneath this there's a gasket, and then there's a tri-clamp, right? So if you're not familiar with tri-clamp fittings, that's how that works. That gasket that sits on the keg, the flat side will sit on the keg, and this side has a ridge underneath here. But this will fit like a 2-inch, and then you can go directly to a 3/4 and go from the keg directly into your plumbing with one of these. Pretty effective if you don't want to use, you know, this tri-clamp type style fitting the whole way. And you can just go into your copper and directly into your condenser with that, and off a keg. Then that right there is $15 on Amazon. You'll probably get it even cheaper off eBay, or probably maybe even cheaper than that off Philbilly if he has them. Because if he has them in stock, he gets them straight out of Shanghai, so he probably gets a pretty good deal on them. But I don't know. You can ask. But they make all different sizes, you know, for 2-inch down half, 3/8. Yeah, something like that be ideal. I would definitely recommend doing that instead of trying to convert your pressure cooker. Definitely, and you know that $35 keg on average, you know, you can find them usually, you know, depending on where you're at. I think what's the deposit on them, guys? I haven't bought a keg in a long time. It's not too high. So you can buy a beer keg, drink the damn beer, keep the keg, and come eat the deposit, you know. And there's places that sell the shit out of them after they use them so many times, they retire them and just go to new ones. So sometimes that $35, and this is 15 on Amazon, so $50 plus, you know, a fitting to go from here to your copper, you're in business. And that's a 15 gallons, so you'll be holding quite a bit more mash than what your pressure cooker is going to hold too. So yeah, for the beer drinkers, I always like boiler makers, you know, for most beers, but I do like some of the you know, the dark beers. When I was in Europe, France and Switzerland and stuff, I like drinking some of those dark beers. Were pretty interesting. Totally unlike the beers we have here. You know, the blonde buds and stuff. They're pretty tasty. Yeah, I'd definitely do that if you can get you some beer kegs. definitely, I think that'd work a lot better for you than using the aluminum. But that big aluminum pot's great for, like I said, boiling water, cooking your mash, great for a lot of things. So it's not like it's going to be useless, you know. And, there's a lot of people with turkey fryers that have the aluminum, the aluminum pots that come with the turkey fryers that perfectly fine for boiling water, cooking mash in those too. There are a lot of people that cook mash in turkey fryer pots and aluminum turkey fryer pots. A lot. So it's fine. I just wouldn't ferment in it and I wouldn't distill in it. Oh yeah. Yeah, the calcium, not just buffering, it also is essential in the fermentation process. That and zinc is a must. I mean, that's something I forgot about. We were talking about the vitamins and stuff earlier. I was talking about biotins and some of the other things that you get out of tomatoes that are beneficial. Now, I'm not going to put tomato paste and all that shit in a brandy or, but like if you were doing a grain or something, it's not going to hurt if you want to do it. But as far as using just that for a nutrient, no. And raisins for nutrient, no. It's just not a good idea. Actually, it's a lot more expensive than the Fermo and the Fermade and the Fermax, and not nearly as effective. So it's a why. It doesn't taste good. I can't imagine that. Tomatoes in my brandies, or in a lot of anything pretty much that I do. Maybe a vodka that I was going to do, that I was going to just distill the shit out of and pretty much take all the flavor out of it. Yeah, yeah. But there's certain essential nutrients though that is beneficial in them. So I'm not going to say they're bad like I used to. I used to say, no, you don't want to use them, they're horrible. But raisins give you a good soft mouth feel and they give you a little bit of flavor, but they're, other than contributing some wild yeast, you're not going to get a whole lot out of the raisins either. How many oyster shells? I just make a cheesecloth bundle. I mean, if it depends on the size of the mash you got. If you got a 50-gallon, mash, you're gonna have a couple of handfuls in there. If you've got a 5-gallon mash, a smaller amount. But you can't really overdo it. I guess they're pretty inert flavor wise. I boil them. So I clean them up real good and boil them, rinse them and boil them real good and keep them clean. And they say they're purified, but I don't trust that. You can get them at the feed store in 40-pound bags. They use them for chickens and gardening. I use it in my gardening too. After I use them for a while, I'll cycle them and start with some new ones and use the old ones and with my tomatoes. If your tomatoes start getting black spots and your peppers start getting black spots, you need calcium. So, because throw those in the soil and that helps avoid that. Yeah, yeah. That and the acidity, helps free some of those aluminum ions from the actual pan. That's what causes the pitting, and probably not a good idea over the long haul. They say it does gives you memory loss and that might be the case. That might be why I'm forgetful. I sure used them. Bread yeast is perfectly fine. I mean, if you're doing grains, bread yeast is fine. I mean, if you like the flavor of it, I mean, who's to say that it's not good if you like the taste of it? I know a lot of people that love it. They've tried Daity, they've tried all the different yeasts and SAF, and they end up going back to good old bread yeast, no Fleischmann's. I used it for ages. It works perfectly fine. It doesn't have the highest alcohol tolerance, probably 12, 14%. It's doesn't have the best temperature range, like some of these other yeasts that you know, designed for a little low temperature, like some of the wine yeast and stuff. It doesn't have as great a range for those, and you know, it might create a little bit more flocculence than, you know, than that's the sediment in the bottom. They call trub flocculence, yeast bed, whatever. Might be a little bit bigger, you know. But some people like the flavor of using the bread yeast with their grains. It's now I wouldn't use it with like wines and stuff, but with like your grain mashes and stuff, it's perfectly fine. There's a lot of browbeaters out there. Say, "Oh my God," he said, "use bread yeast." Can you believe it? Oh my God, I'll never listen to him again. There's actually pretty decent sized distilleries out there that make whiskeys every day with bread yeast, and people don't even know. So yeah, but experiment with different yeast. I can't say, you know, there's no right or wrong answer to that. Yes, you can. Is it the best? Probably not. Um, but best is subjective. You know, what's best to you is maybe not best to somebody else. You know, so it's good to experiment with the yeast. But you know, generally people tend to gravitate towards the daty yeast. It's inexpensive, and it's designed for, you know, just that purpose. A grain mash with for distilling, quick and done and easy. And but is it the best? Probably not. I mean, there's a lot of different ones. Some people say this is the best. Um, the 927 from Farm Solutions. There's a lot of different yeasts out there, and you really should experiment with different ones and see what flavor you got, because they do each have unique flavor characteristics, and some people get used to that bread yeast. That's just what they want to use. Yeah, just it's the crushed oyster shells for chicken. Now I get like the 40-pound bag, because like you can get a 5-pound bag and it's like $6, or you can get the 40-pound bag and it's like 12. And I use it gardening and stuff, so and it doesn't go bad. You know, they're ancient. The coral is basically ancient coral that's embedded in with the oyster shells and stuff, and it's all been purified, they say, but it comes out of the ocean, so there could be little critters in there. So I boil mine just to be on the safe side. Excuse me, rinse them out real well, so I don't want any, you know, off flavors from them. But yeah, the it's good. It's good for a healthy fermentation too. It actually not just buffers. It provides calcium, much needed calcium. Yeah, yeah. I mean, just keep them in the bottom there, and when you're done with it, just take them out and rinse them. You know, just put them in a strainer and rinse them real good under the sink, and you know, let them dry. And when you get ready for another one, just tie them up. I just tie mine up in cheesecloth, and it just keeps them perfectly, you know, separate. So I can just pull the bag out when I'm done, you know, when I'm done racking it off, you know, siphoning off everything. I can just pull that out, set it in a strainer, run it under some water, let it dry. Next fermentation, you know, bag it up, put it back in there. Works great. Now I've not done it for rum, but for whiskeys, it, I used it for my moon. I've used it for my corn liquor for 30 years. Fleischmann's and whatever bread yeast I could get, because that's, you know, before Amazon, or if you grew up in Eastern Kentucky or in a rural place, I mean, your choices of yeast are basically bread yeast, right? You know, now these days probably a little bit better variety in some stores, but you know, for me in the 70s and 80s and 90s, you know, it's pretty much bread yeast. That's all you get. Yeah, well, they don't dissolve. They do dissolve, but the acid, as acid develops, and there's a whole host of acids, organic acids, tons of them that are created in in the fermentation process. And as they're created, that's why your pH drops as fermentation goes. Your pH will drop, and it becomes more and more acidic as all these acids are created. And as they're created, if you have this in there to buffer, it will slowly eat away at the calcium and help just keep the pH buffered. But like if your pH is real low, you just can't throw a bunch of shells in there and it'll jump up, right? So it's not a quick change thing. It's something that you need there from the start. So it's not going to be replacing anything like a calcium hydroxide or pickling lime um, that you would use to bring pH up if you didn't have them in there and you were having a pH problem. Um, Not great to use baking soda, or not the best, but calcium hydroxide is a little better. It's pickling lime, so that's a little bit better um, than I'm trying to think of. Hydrated lime, yeah. Calcium hydroxide or hydrated lime, builder's lime, any of those, pretty much the same thing. I like using the food grade stuff, so pickling lime works. But yeah, hydrated lime. So I was trying to think of both of those will work. Yep, boost your pH if you have to quick, because even though it's not good to do that, it's still better to boost it that way and create the oxygen issue with the yeast than to have the yeast stress from a really low pH below 3. So yeah, there you go. Or cheesecloth, yeah, whatever you want. Yeah, I missed that. Yeah, like Clint saying, it's not going to hurt anything. If they're not used, just rinse them off, use them the next time. But over time, they will slowly, dissolve out. You'll need to replenish them, boil some more, and replenish them. But just rinse them out every time and use them, reuse them. You're fine. You might want to boil them, between uses if getting bacteria off after they sit there a little while. You don't want to have that build up. So, but like in a sour mash, they're really good to have in a sour mash, and you can just leave them in there. Yeah, yeah. Low pH in aluminum is a big no. That's why I say using aluminum for fermenting and running probably not the best. But boiling water and cooking your grains down or whatever, they're perfectly fine for that. Yeah, no, don't use the pickle jar. Yeah, we've had people talking about that. That's if the shit hit the fan and you had no other way of doing it, you know, you can do it this way, but it's dangerous. Don't do it. Don't please. We had somebody on here last week that was doing it. And they were scared to death it's going to break and explode and cause a fire, and it's like, don't do it. Just don't. It's just too much risk involved, and it's neat. It got a lot of clicks, and a lot of people commented on it. I'd say half or more were negative, saying it's crazy, don't do that. And, I kind of tend to agree, but it is something different. And if the shit hit the fan, you could do it that way, because some people say no, it can't be done. So feel really had to do it to prove it. But anytime, brother, that's what we're here for. Oh, Miss April, how you doing, honey? Oh yeah, yeah. That's why they sold them over there, man. Actually, they had like vending machines over there. You know, here you have to pull out your ID and show. Fuck, over there, man, there's like 10, 12, 13-year olds filling vending machines with francs and euros buying freaking beer out of the vending machine. You know, anybody, there's no drinking age over there. Everybody just, you know, it's like we have a Pepsi machine here. You have a beer machine there, you know, or a wine machine. Yeah, it's a lot different. But yeah, I like the dark beers best. They're very interesting. I was just the blonde beers really don't do anything for me. It's just you know, I don't get that much flavor out of them. But some of those dark beers, man, they had some good grungy flavors. Yeah, if you have the shells in there from the very get go, you tend to not run into pH issues, right? But if you forget to use the shells and you don't have them in there, it's not something that you can just throw in to lower the pH real quick. So, you know, yeah, that's when you really want to use pickling lime or hydrated lime or something like that. Food grade. Um, I like the pickling lime for that. But if you have nothing other than baking soda, that's got salts in it, which aren't very good for your yeast, and this shit foams up a lot, and it's only a real short, quick fix, but it's still better than letting the acidity levels down. Measure your pH. Don't if it gets into the fours and you're a few days away from being done, don't start throwing this shit in there because it's gonna fuck shit up. Um, if it gets into the fours, don't worry about it. If you're getting close to the end of fermentation, that's naturally going to happen. You want that to happen. It's going to happen. It's just when it gets stuck and it's 3 or in the high twos or low threes, real low threes. That's when it's probably going to be time to add some pickling lime. You don't want it to get that low and stress the yeast because the flavors that you get from that's going to be a lot worse than the flavors you get from adding the pickling lime and the stress that those cause. So it's the lesser of the two evils, I guess you could say. Bud Light. Yeah. Water. That and Coors Light. And a lot of them, man. And all the light beers, it's like water to me. Firm K. I'll be honest with you. I don't know a lot about it. I've used the Firm O and the Firm Max. That's the two that I've used. I've not used the K. Let's see what they say about it. Let's just do a little Firm K versus Firm O and see what it says. Firm K contains DAP. Formate O is organic nitrogen only, so it doesn't have the diammonium phosphate. I would say that's probably your biggest difference is going to be that. The Firm O, it says gentler on yeast. A lot of winemakers like it, very forgiving. Um, Most people really love for their Firm O. You can't go wrong with the Firm O. The Firm K, I think if you're going to use the K, you might as well just use straight Firm Max. Pretty much the same thing. That. And yeah, it's something that you don't want to use too much of. So if you got diammonium phosphate, dosage can be an issue, especially with wine making. I agree with that. Um, and the urea we were talking about, you definitely it's best definitely not to overdo your nutrients, kind of underdo them. If it says a tablespoon, I'm going to use 3/4 of one. I never do full dose. regardless. So I tend to always underdo them. But Fermo is probably one of the best options, really, for all around use. More expensive though than the Fermax, but you get what you pay for. The elderberry makes excellent wine. Hell yeah. The elderberry is really good along with a lot of other things. You know, elderberry and blackberry, really good. Elderberry and blueberry, elderberry and cherry. You know, elderberry not only makes a good wine by itself, it's one of those things that a lot of winemakers use it in conjunction with other berries to make some pretty good ones. Yeah, me too, man. It's an awesome hobby. I've enjoyed doing it. You know, hell, I went years that I didn't even drink, and I still I still made it and gave it away just for the fun of it. But the wine, I'm definitely digging making the wine these days. I'm enjoying wine making, so that's kind of a new hobby with me is trying to make really good wines, and then if it doesn't turn out, I can always distill it, right? But as you get older, the hard liquor, you know, it's hard on you, you know, especially the way I drink it straight. You know, I don't do a lot of mixed drinks and stuff. I like straight whiskey. You know, pretty much has been my go-to beverage. That moonshine, you know, it's been my go-to beverage for many bourbon, whatever, for many years. Yeah, elderberries are the bomb. They make real good wine. I'm not sure about quick rise red yeast. I don't know. Interesting. There are lot of different types. You know, some that you have to kind of start. You know, there's the active dry, and then I think some of them that you have to actually. That may be what that was, like an active yeast that already. And some you have to add some warm water to get them activated, right? So it's possible. No, sir. I'm not African American. I don't know. That's why does it gets, bro? We got a lot of brothers in here, though. Yeah, yeah. And when you met a girl, you didn't look at their throat. Just saying. You got to be careful, man. I've seen some pictures of some of these, man. They're like, God damn, that's a dude that make pretty good looking woman. You know, I've seen some of them look pretty fucking hot. It's like, you know, you got to start checking them throats, man, because there's some that look pretty convincing with all that fucking makeup and shit. Just saying. I mean, it gets scary, man. It's crazy. It's a different world now. But yeah, they've seen. Yeah, I mean it's a different time, man. I guess there's always been transsexuals. You know, I'm I'm one of those people. You know, I think if that's what floats your boat, more power to you. You know, I don't give a fuck. You know, I don't judge people like that. You know, if that's what they want to do, if they want to be gay, they want to wear makeup and a dress, or the girl wants to act like a guy. You know, who in the hell am I telling them what to do? You know, more power to you. Just don't get mad when I misgender you. You know, if you walk up, you got titties, and I call you ma'am, don't get pissed off. You know, I didn't know you had a flannel shirt and jeans on because you wanted to be a dude. I just saw titties. You know, I'm sorry. So you know but they have to understand. You know, misgendering is just natural. People see titties, they call you ma'am. Like I say, I've seen some dudes look more like girls, and some girls I've seen some girls that look like dudes, you know. So, but yeah, I don't care what they do. That's their own business. That's the way they want to be. That's fine. I don't care. More power to them. Free country, you know. We fight for those freedoms, you know. Pantyhose. There you go. Yeah, it's like cheesecloth, man. It's inert. It doesn't have any. It's not plastic. It's kind of a cloth, you know, kind of, I guess, made cotton, aren't they? So it's kind of inert. I always worry about using nylons and rayons and polyesters and all these things because I don't know how much alcohol has effects solubility wise on them. It might be a solvent to them, so I don't know. I just got a bunch of cheesecloth cheap, and I just use that. I use it for a lot of shit. But I got a big old roll of it, so I just unroll it, put it in there, tie it up, and done with it. And untie it when I'm done, rinse it out, and shake it, and put it out on a paper towel, and let them dry out, and they'll be good for the next time. You know. Yeah, there's tons of different yeasts. That's one of the things people really need to branch out. I've heard a lot of people say all yeast are the same. You know, there's nothing that screams, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, than making that same statement, you know, because all yeasts aren't the same, and you can get so many different flavors, so many different characteristics. There's so many different things that they're suited to. You know, there's certain yeasts that are definitely better with meads than others. You know, they've been engineered for, you know, that specific type of fermentation. You know, there's certain yeasts that are made for rums that include imbritases and things, so you can get some of those fermentables. You know, there's lots of specialty yeasts out there that have things like that in it. So there's just so many different types of yeast and Kveki yeast, but let's talk about very, very popular yeast. So, and wine yeast, different wine and champagne yeast. You know, I've got probably 6, 7 different yeasts that I experiment with, and I want to try more. And I've got the yellow label. I've got those firm solutions. Of course, I've got the EC1118. I've got Red Star Premier Rouge for my dark fruits. I got Premier Blanc for my light fruits and champagnes. I've got red yeast. I've got, let's say, the yellow label angel yeast. D47. What else is? Of course, the Fleischmann bread yeast. And there's some other ones up there. I don't know. Hell, I got more yeast than I know. Mine probably right in the middle of that. I've got an 18.5 gallon still that I usually run about 15, 16 gallons in. So, you know, I'll probably do a 30, 35 so I can get a couple of runs out of it. Just depends, you know. I know, like with the watermelons, I've got I probably got close to 8 or 9 gallons of each different one, and I'm going to try to run those separately to see how they taste, and they might get put back in together and run together with some back set. But I'm going to try each of them individually. I wish I had a little bit smaller. I've got a smaller keg out there, but I don't really have full of that. But yeah. That's right. What's going on, Chris? Strawberries. Be careful, man. That fruity stuff start molding up on you in those long-term things. Yeah, the Quebec bottle, that's good stuff. That's real good stuff. And do a starter. Like Clint said, just try to do a starter and get it really super oxygenated. When you get it in that jar as a starter, shake the shit out of it, and it'll multiply in that jar. It'll foam up. So don't put the lid on. After you shake it up, take the lid off and set it inside of a big pan. That way, when it foams over, if it foams over, you won't have a mess. But super oxygenation really kicks the breeding cycle in on yeast. That's like when I was talking about earlier, when you add baking soda or calcium hydroxide into it to raise your pH, it'll foam up like crazy. And when it does that, it adds a lot of oxygen to it. So your yeast kind of quit doing the eat and pissing alcohol to breeding again. So that kind of can halt production a little bit while they go back into breeding. And then, of course, they go back to eating after they get done screwing and breeding and reproducing. But it definitely changes the mode. So you go from an anaerobic fermentation to an aerobic fermentation, back to an anaerobic fermentation, and but that's still better than stressing your yeast with 2.8 pH or low, high 2s or low 3 pH. Low 3s if you're at the end's fine, but you start getting into the 2s, it's most yeast start failing. Yep, definitely. And if they're not real ripe, if they're not perfectly ripe, they even have more. Yep, it's about that time, brother. Yeah, it's after 11. Just a second here. Now, why did I not see that comment? Shadow, 5 minutes ago. Let me see. Maybe that's why I didn't see it. I didn't scroll down. I was just looking at the militia pages. I'm seeing. I made a comment on Thursday night show with the ladies, and it didn't show up in the comments in the stream room. Mr. Morgan. Yeah, now I saw you. How's it going, brother? I saw your question there. I haven't used the yellow label yet, so I did see your question in the militia page, but I'm not seeing it on here. What's my opinion on the yellow label? I don't have one yet, but I have heard some good things from people that's used it. I've heard that it does take longer, that it does convert. It does have a little bit different flavor, but it's not a bad flavor. Some people like it, some people don't. It's just different, than some other yeast. All yeasts are different, give different flavor profiles. Um, Probably better suited for some things than others. Uh, but all in all, it's going to be pretty cool. I can't wait to try. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna buy 2 bags of cracked corn. So 150-pound bags are going to get cooked, going to get converted, and going to get steeped and converted and put in a 1 barrel. And I'm going to put the exact same cracked corn from another bag. Cold mash, no hot water, no nothing, because I'm going to see what kind of lacto and other bacteria you have to deal with without any hot, cold ferment, and put the yellow label on that. Just nothing else, no sugar, nothing else, and see how well each do. And worst comes worst, I can always throw some glucose in there and help break everything down. Jose, I must have missed your question, brother. With a beard like that comes knowledge and wisdom. Thanks for sharing. Thanks, brother. I'm sorry, but I like when I get in here where I'm answering people from, as the questions screen, I can only see like 8 comments at a time on my little comments in the software that I use for the streaming. So I tend to get a little bit behind. So I'm not ignoring anybody. And so I'm sorry if some people think, oh, he's not going to read my comment. I just hadn't got down to him yet. So that's 11:09. It's 11:23. So I'm a little bit behind, but I appreciate it, brother. Thank you. Cherry wine going. That's awesome. Yeah. Scotch, huh? Interesting. No, brother. Stick around and talk, bro. I'm sorry that I didn't get to your comment, but I do stay a little bit behind, and I should probably mention that from time to time because some people just log on and they don't realize that I'm not able to handle things, and it doesn't like pop up for me when you make the comment. I have to scroll down to it, so it's not like every new comment pops up on my screen, and I wish it would do that. But yeah, I try to answer every question as they come, and sometimes I get very behind, man. Sometimes I can be 30 minutes behind. So right now, me being 10 minutes behind, that's good. But I'm glad you're here, brother. Yeah, it's a great hobby, man. Yeah, I love reading some of that stuff of Alan's writings. Very interesting. I love learning about the history and about the old stuff. That's some of the knowledge that I don't have is distillates from all over the world. What a lot of different cultures make and stuff. I'm not real learned on that yet. I mean, I'm okay, but I'm not real. I'm not down with what Jewish moonshine or something that was done in the Mediterranean in the 1600s and all that. I'm 600 AD. And the Crusade wines and shit. I just don't know about all that. Yeah, have a good mug grip. Pomegranate wine, chime, and turkey. Sounds good. I like pomegranate. Well, let's see. Let me check my chart, Jose. I think it might have pomegranate on there. It probably doesn't, though. I don't remember it being on there. Yeah, let's see here. Let's go down the list here. Pomegranate. There we go. 10.1 grams of sugar. So it should do quite well, Jose. Yeah, just break them down and get a gravity reading on it. Should make a really fine wine. Yeah, I love pomegranate. But yeah, I think they have a pit in them, if I'm not mistaken. So you'd want to get that out, kind of grind them up, and maybe cook them a little bit and get some of those juices and everything, and blend them up and crush the pomegranates and get all the flavor out of them that you can, and then strain it out. But yeah, that would be something pretty interesting if you can get them pretty cheap. I'm sure that'd make a good wine, though. Sounds good. Yeah, they got plenty of sugars, 10.1 gram. That's awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of, Firm Solutions has a lot. They don't sell a lot, but they've got literally thousands in their inventory, different yeasts and stuff that Patrick was talking about. They got shitloads of them. Yeah, you just got, everybody should try lots of different yeast because, but I was just talking about that. I was like, it depends, different yeast for different applications. Like we were talking about earlier, like a bread yeast for a whiskey's fine, but probably not something you'd want to use in a wine, and I'm sure wine yeast, some people wouldn't consider using a wine yeast for grains. It's just, it's not what they were really designed for. Not that they won't work well together, because I know EC 1118 works fine with grains, and that's a champagne yeast. So, but I would say with something like that, a good Red Star Premier Rouge, I like using that with reds and dark fruits. So, a Premier Rouge or a good wine, wine yeast would be fine. And do it inside at room temperature in the 70s and to 80s. That's perfect temperature for a wine yeast. If you got a basement, even better. So they like it a little bit cooler, but warmer. EC 1118 would work. It has a pretty large range of temperature, and it's a champagne yeast, so that would work pretty well with it as well. Yeah, I saw somebody earlier this week doing a all wheat run. It's looking pretty good. Yeah, it's getting late, fellas. Gonna have to call her a night. Clint, tell him about your heat belt, brother. I don't use a heat belt. I use I've got the oil filled radiators. I just put right in the middle of my 3 or 4 barrels, whatever I got going, and it keeps them perfectly warm. But it's in my basement, so I'm only warming up from 70. It's not like it's outside, in a utility building that's getting down to 30 and freezing, right? Yeah, glad you found us, brother. We're here on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 Eastern. So go to Philbilly Moonshine page and Militia Moonshine page. They're on YouTube, and subscribe and hit that notification bell. And they're pretty good about sending out notifications every time we do a podcast. So there are some other podcasts that are also done on Philbilly's channel, other than just mine. We do a shit show on Friday, and the girls have a girls' night out on Thursday, and so there's something going on, different times of the week. But yeah, we love having you here, brother, and we bring all your questions. We can help you with simple questions all the way up to complex questions. Me and between me and I'd say between me, Scott, and Clint, that's over 100 years of experience. You know, me and Clint over 40 years each. So yeah, we can answer about any question you got, brother. Everybody, I'm going to scroll through and see if I missed any questions. If I did, ask it again real quick because I'm scrolling down. Master seedling heater mat. For small ones, I've got the same thing. For small ones, that works fine. But for a big barrel, I don't know how well that would work. But I love my little oil fields. But like I say, that won't work outside very well. But in the basement or inside, it'll keep it up in the 80s easy. You know, whatever temp your yeast are needing or prefer, you can adjust it. You know. Yeah, I've been kind of waiting mine too. I'd like to do some big runs outside in my big barrels and do a bunch of them. It's outside and I don't have to use the heater. But it's been 100. Now this week's going to be good, so I've got some watermelon I got to distill, and after that I'm going to focus on some grains. Yep, yep. Yeah, that's why a lot of them make their moonshine out there. That's why they do it at home, you know. Yeah, I like Gandalf. Yeah, I got my little Gandalf hat. They just call me the Whiskey Wizard. Yeah, yeah. I did the same thing, Mark. I couldn't bring myself to distill it. It was so damn good. Yeah, yeah, yep. We can make all kinds of good stuff, Jose. Come back in, bring your questions, and we can help you with that pomegranate or any kind of unique thing you want. I mean, it's something new. It's going to be hard to find a lot of people out there that's run pomegranates. To be honest with you, I mean, wine. I learned a lot about my wine, and I threw myself in making brandies and stuff. I threw myself into some of these wine groups, and I'm not talking about just people that are casual. I'm talking about wine groups of people that actually own wineries and stuff that'll talk to you. And I actually consulted some local wineries and talked to them as well. So, um, yeah, yeah, we definitely love to. We got a lot of festivals and stuff we go to, Jose, all over the place, and a lot of people will bring their samples to them, and we'll all try them, and we'll bring some of what we make, and we'll camp together, and there'll be music playing, and they're a lot of good. They're a lot of fun. Just hang out and drink with your buddies, and each bring you different whiskeys and wines, and everybody try them and compare them and brag, and we got competitions and stuff. It's a lot of fun, brother. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, there's money to be made in the little legal and illegal side of it still. There's, it's you can make it pretty inexpensively, and alcohol's not cheap, and so you can make some inexpensive, cheap shine, and make a buck at it, or you can, start your own micro distillery or your own craft distillery and go legit and make big money, definitely money to be made in it, legit, legally and illegally. But we don't talk about the illegal side, right? We don't talk about selling it. We talk about making it and sharing it with friends and stuff. But if you want to sell it, that's your own business. We just don't really talk about it on here, or we can't talk about can I buy some of yours and all that. We can't talk about that because you know, of course, Facebook and all the rules and stuff. So we can't really discuss any of that. But yeah, there's money to be made in the industry, both legal and illegal, depending on where you are and who you know. And you know, if you don't know a lot of people, it's a big risk. Lalvin 71B, that's you know, that's great. I use the 74. It's great for meads and stuff. But the 71 is a good yeast. I've heard that. A lot of people using it. Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, it depends on what market niche you want to hit and how you want to run your business. I mean, there's 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 actually a market for cheap, not so good shine out there. You know, not everybody can afford the, you know, the price of a quart of good moonshine. So, you know, you can make some cheap rot gut and sell it and make money if you want to find that market niche, and if you find that you live in an area where people really aren't willing to pay top dollar, you know, or decent money for it, maybe you have to make a little cheaper shine and fall to that niche, or post flavor. That's a very popular thing these days. You know, make some, run some neutral and mix it with some juice and make some flavor. Good night, Tammy. Hope you sleep well over in Gear County tonight. I'll get up with you on that t-shirt though, or on that hoodie. Yeah, yeah, it's past 11:30. Yeah, y'all let me talk all night with you. Take it easy, Richard. You do the same, brother. Take it easy, Mash Brothers. Yeah, Clint's wanted to ask about the heat barrels. I've heard that built for those. I've not used those, or the fish tank heaters. Night, Jeffrey. Thanks for stopping in, brother. All right, y'all. Yeah, donations. What's that? All right, y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week. We will see you all here either Friday night for the shit show for craziness, or Saturday for more questions and answers. And I don't know, maybe I keep saying I'm going to try to have something done about wine a little bit. Maybe give out one of my recipes and a step for step how to do a wine for a wine, not just for wine for brandy, but a wine to age as a wine. So maybe we'll talk a bit about that on Saturday. But until then, everybody have a great week. Shine on. Peace out. Love y'all. Tune in Saturday, and we'll continue our discussions, brothers. We'll see y'all then. Later.